If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 101, Storm Terror. The Wind Dragon was, after all, the first major boss that the traveler encountered on the main quest line of the game, so Nolan had some understanding of it. Originally, it was one of the four Winds Guardians of Monstadt, the Wind Dragon of the East, also known as Dvalin, a subordinate of the Inmo Archon. However, in a battle long ago with the Shadow Dragon Durin, despite emerging victorious, Dvalin ingested poisoned blood and was forced into a long slumber. Upon awakening, the twisted power of the poison still affected its sanity. Believing that the people of Monstadt no longer recognized it and considered it a traitor, it had been causing chaos around the city. If Nolan's guess was correct, the Storm Terror had only recently awakened. After all, its activities had caused quite a stir, yet there had been no news of it before. So, with the Storm Terror appearing, wouldn't the traveler be close behind? It seemed that the main storyline of the game might begin soon. Actually, it didn't concern Nolan much. With his current strength, he couldn't defeat the Storm Terror to gain Adventure EXP. Didn't you see how powerless they were against just a passing attack of wind element? Nolan was well aware of this fact. He needed to be cautious and not provoke the Wind Dragon. It wouldn't be wonderful if he accidentally got involved in something big. On the other hand, the traveler, as someone who could travel between worlds, had lost most of their power but still has their memories. If there was a chance, he could learn more about this aspect of things and see if he could acquire the skills of traveling between worlds. After all, if there was a chance to go back to Earth, he would definitely want to go back. Moreover, with the skill of traveling between worlds, he could explore more unknown worlds. This was something to look forward to. Although it was unclear whether the traveler's ability to travel between worlds was a learnable skill or an innate talent. Even if it was the latter and couldn't be learned like knowledge, there might still be a chance to acquire her abilities after maxing out her affection. Because before, in the Thousand Winds Temple secret realm, it was already known from the Abyssal Mages that their leader was Prince aka Traveler Ether. So, the one who had recently awakened was most likely Lumen. As a girl, Nolan could increase her affection. After all, with the blessing of the Archon seat obtained from maxing out her affection, it wasn't the same as the Archon seat ability in the original work. Instead, it was a special ability that represented the personality and experiences of the person who reached max affection, among other things. Just like every person on the continent of Teyvat had their own unique Archon seat, Lumen, although not from Teyvat, also had her own seat. It was named the Traveler's Seat. What the Traveler herself was doing was traveling in Teyvat, mainly, primarily searching for missing relatives. Regardless of the past or the future, the Traveler's fate seemed closely tied to traveling. This was probably why Lumen's seat was called the Traveler's Seat. Because the most symbolic characteristic of the Traveler was traveling. So, if Lumen's affection towards Nolan reached max level, there was a high probability of him receiving the corresponding abilities. This was one reason why Nolan was looking forward to it. Another reason, of course, was his curiosity about the game's protagonist. By the way, there was also the guide Paimon, who had been accompanying the traveler. Her origin was quite mysterious and intriguing. Of course, Nolan wouldn't actively seek out others' secrets. It was easy to provoke hostility, so it was better to go with the flow. While Nolan was lost in his thoughts, Fiskal and Ellen were checking the injuries on his back. The back of Nolan's thin short-sleeved shirt had been torn open in several places, revealing a patch of reddened skin with a few traces of blood seeping out. Phew. It's okay, this princess have some healing ointment. Let me apply it for you. Fiskal confirmed that there wasn't a major issue. She stood with her legs slightly apart, wrapped in black stockings, and her arms crossed, returning to her dignified demeanor. With a gentle thought, a bottle of healing ointment powder from the Church of Favonius appeared in her hand. Bear with it a little. A faint smile appeared on Fiskal's fair face. Pressing down on Nolan's shoulder, she signaled him to bend his back and lift his shirt. She uncorked the bottle with her hand, pouring the white powder onto Nolan's reddened back, forming a mini mountain. Then, her fair fingers spread the powder in circular motions, resembling drawing circles. Along with the gentle touch of her fingertips came a soft sensation, accompanied by a slight burning and tingling. As time passed, Fiskal continued to gently rub his back, her warm body temperature transmitted through her fingertips, slightly easing the pain in Nolan's back. Feeling better? Ellen asked from the side. Yeah, much better. If Her Royal Highness rubs any more, my skin might come off. Nolan joked slightly. Hearing Nolan's words, Fiskal's brows furrowed slightly, and she subconsciously wanted to pat him on the back, but then she changed her mind and compassionately adjusted her action. She hugged her chest again, gently pressing against the soft abdomen covered by the mesh black stockings. She lifted her fair chin slightly, emitting a dissatisfied humph sound. Clearly, she was just trying to help, yet he dared to be picky. How annoying. Oh my, it's really surprising. That was a dragon just now, wasn't it? Ounce, the night raven, flew out from deeper within the cave. Due to its lightness, it was carried even further by the hurricane. Ahoy! I always thought it was just a legend. I never thought I'd see it with my own eyes one day. Ellen's eyes widened as if they could emit light. Even if we didn't see it today, we could still encounter it later. By then, everyone in Monstadt would witness it causing a wind disaster and attacking the city. Nolan thought slightly sarcastically. Is it worth being surprised by something that's not even as good as this princess's backyard pet? Fiskal puffed out her chest and flicked her golden hair to the side before arrogantly speaking. A pet? Ellen showed a look of disbelief, but after spending a day together, she had a bit of an understanding of Fiskal's personality, so she didn't refute. She said as she changed the topic. That dragon should have just passed by. It's probably gone now. Let's leave quickly to prevent any accidents. Although Ellen was a bit excited about meeting the legendary magic dragon, from its behavior, this legendary dragon was still quite dangerous, so in order to prevent any accidents, it was better to leave first. Yeah, my backpack is torn, let me pack up. Nolan nodded and said. There were several bottles of elemental potions in his backpack. Please don't let them get damaged. After all, collecting those elemental materials wasn't easy. All right, let's help together. Everyone gathered the scattered items on the ground. Nolan found that the backpack had a large rip from the shoulder strap and was completely unusable. The quiver and the arrows inside were slightly bent from the impact. For ordinary people, this would probably have a significant impact on their use, but Nolan's archery had the extraordinary attribute of advanced stability, so it shouldn't be a big problem. End of chapter Volume 2, The Great Adventure starts. Chapter 102, The Raging Storm Unleashed. However, when Nolan saw the cracked row of glass test tubes containing elemental potions leaking out, he suddenly felt like his heart was going to convulse. 10 bottles of elemental potions, only one used, and now the remaining 9 were gone in an instant. How could he not feel heartbroken about this? Fortunately, Nolan had taken good protective measures by storing them in his backpack, preventing explosions from occurring due to impact. Otherwise, several bottles of lightning elemental potions and fire elemental potions exploding on his back, followed by overload reactions, would be unimaginable. Nolan couldn't withstand such formidable elemental attacks at the moment. The remaining items in the backpack, like dry food, were too dirty to eat, and the folded portable tent might have been torn when hitting the mountain wall. Overall, the loss was severe. Sigh, but they were all just material possessions. As long as everyone was safe, Nolan could only console himself with such thoughts. Just some elemental potions. This princess can provide you with materials to make more. Fiskal took out the ice mist flower she had just used, grabbed Nolan's hand, and placed it in his hand without any concern. Feeling the icy touch of the ice mist flower in his palm, Nolan shook his head slightly and returned it to Fiskal. It wasn't that he didn't want it, but he didn't have the elemental potion formula to use the ice mist flower, so holding onto it would be useless. Thanks, Your Highness, but I can't use it right now. You keep it for now, and I'll ask you for it when I need it. Nolan smiled and explained. Besides, he had no backpack to store things in now. He couldn't just carry it in his hands. All right, I'll keep it for you, and you can ask me for it whenever you need it. A gust of wind blew in from outside the cave, causing Fiskal's golden hair cascading down her back to flutter to the side, revealing the snow-white skin not covered by her black short skirt. With nothing else to do, Nolan and the others walked out of the cave. To their surprise, they found that the cold wind accompanied by drizzling rain had been blowing in continuously from outside, and it seemed to be getting stronger with time. What's going on here? Wasn't the weather quite nice just now? Ellen stood at the cave entrance, looking up at the sky, which was now covered in dark clouds, and noticed that the trees in the distance were being blown in all directions by the strong wind. That dragon seems to control the wind element, or perhaps it's more appropriate to call it the wind dragon storm terror. I suppose this storm followed it here. Ounce the night raven, who was flapping his wings, said speculatively. Suddenly, a gust of wind rushed into the cave entrance, and the raindrops merged with the wind, instantly soaking the three of them who were caught off guard. Ah, such a strong wind! Fiscal instinctively raised her hands, clad in thin long sleeves, to shield herself, but it was futile. The raindrops hitting her black stockings made the color slightly darker where they struck, and they clung even tighter to her soft legs, revealing her snow-white skin as if transparent. The hem of her dark purple skirt seemed to be trying to escape, lifting up, revealing the round and soft buttocks wrapped in the thong-style black stockings. Let's retreat for now. There's no way we can go back in this situation. Ellen used her adventure backpack to block the wind and rain as she stepped back step by step. Nolan nodded at her words. He was already drenched from head to toe, looking as if he had been sweating profusely. Nolan, Fiscal, Ellen, and Ounce quickly retreated, running 5 or 6 meters before they no longer felt the rain, but the cold air brought in by the roaring wind combined with the naturally damp and cold environment of the cave. This sudden drop in temperature even caused Nolan to sneeze, feeling moisture brewing in his nostrils. It's freezing. Let's regroup by those fire pits further in, he suggested through chattering teeth. It was about several tens of meters from the cave entrance to the end of the cave. Generally, even in a severe storm, it wouldn't penetrate that deeply. So, the several small fire pits were flickering slightly but still burning steadily, providing warmth. They found a slightly higher and flat area and moved the 3 small fire pits over, placing them in different directions. Huddling within the circle of the 3 fire pits, they instantly felt much warmer. Don't celebrate too soon, everyone. Ounce, who stood on the ground to avoid extinguishing the flames with his wings, said in a somewhat serious tone. Oh? What do you mean? Nolan didn't understand for a moment. Fiscal pressed her left hand against her right arm, rolled up the wet black silk sleeve cover over her elbow, then pulled off the front end of the sleeve cover, revealing her fair and soft arms, saying. Hee with the outside raining like doomsday, it's hard not to cause panic among those foolish creatures. Night Raven Ounce nodded and relayed. Miss means, with such heavy rain outside, both beasts and monsters will instinctively seek shelter, and this cave, without a doubt, will be their target. By then, it will be difficult for us not to conflict with them. So, you're saying we might face attacks from a large number of beasts and monsters? Nolan said with some surprise after thinking about it. His adventure experience was still shallow, and he hadn't considered this situation just now. Ah! Ellen said with some concern, will dangerous monsters come over? It's hard to say. We'll have to rely on luck. Night Raven Ounce replied slightly helplessly. At this moment, Nolan suddenly felt slightly relieved. Fortunately, he wasn't adventuring with Bennett. Otherwise, the storm terror might not have just passed by, it might have blocked the entrance to the cave directly. And the probability of this happening was very high. He was confident in Bennett's bad luck. In Monstadt, Bennett, who had just received a commission from the Adventurers Guild, looked at the clear sky. Just as he was about to smile as brightly as the sun, he suddenly felt his nose itching and couldn't help but sneeze. He couldn't help muttering to himself. Are Dads and the others gossiping about me again? Oh no. As Bennett walked, scratching the back of his head in confusion, he suddenly felt his feet slip, and he fell forward, hitting the ground hard. Then, feeling tears welling up in his eyes, he touched his nose and, looking at the ground with a tone of resignation and familiarity, said. Who left a banana peel again? Ever since parting ways with Nolan, I've been having the worst luck again. But when we adventure together, the jinxes just seem to dissipate. I heard there have been strange wolf sightings around Wolvendom lately, maybe I'll invite him to join me there soon. Bennett stood up, patted his knees, and gave a bright smile to the passerby, while also picking up the banana peel that caused him to fall and putting it in the trash can. Chapter 103, Influx of Monsters. Monstadt, Starfell Valley. The wind dragon utilized the wind element to trigger a wide range of cumulonimbus clouds, causing the sudden storm. This led to many beasts and monsters scrambling to find shelter from the rain. Inside the unnamed cave, Fiscal took off a pair of elegant black silk long sleeves, lowered her head, and used her fair fingers to touch the slightly wet leotard on her abdomen. The black silk fabric, dampened by the rain, slightly stuck to the skin, revealing the slightly concave belly button. She pinched the clothing and gently rubbed it, trying to dry it a bit. Luckily, it was only a bit damp on her stomach. After the moisture spread across the fabric, it would soon dry out, and there was no need to change clothes. When adventuring outdoors, it's inevitable that clothes get dirty or damaged, so she had another spare set stored in her vision. Although Nolan and Ellen also got a little wet, standing near the fire pits dried them quickly. There were 3 fire pits, one for each person. Soon, when everyone's clothes were almost dry, perhaps it was as Fiscal and Ounce, the 2 experienced adventurers, said, there was a sound of running footsteps echoing in the cave tunnel, accompanied by the grunt of pigs. Could it be a wild boar? Nolan looked towards the darkening tunnel ahead, where the firelight couldn't reach, thinking so. But when they actually saw the approaching creature, they were all a bit surprised. Indeed, it was a wild boar, but it was at least twice the size of a common wild boar. Such a big wild boar! Could it be the wild boar king? Ellen covered her mouth, slightly surprised and puzzled. It shouldn't be, but it may have the potential to become one, otherwise it wouldn't grow this big. Nolan had seen the Snowboar King in the Dragonspine Mountains map in the game. Its head was like a small mountain, incomparable to ordinary snowboars. Although he hadn't seen the Wild Boar King, he speculated that it would be similar. The wild boar in front of them obviously hadn't reached that level yet. Oh no, everyone be careful. It seems like it's going to attack us. Ounce reminded. Perhaps its massive size gave the wild boar enough courage, or rather, dominance, as it clearly couldn't accept other creatures sharing the shelter it found from the rain. It dug its hooves, its pig eyes slightly reddened, and its ferocious tusks, possibly often used for digging, were stained with some dark yellow mud. Be careful, don't let it damage the fire pits. Ellen said anxiously. She wanted to stop it, but she also understood that she couldn't withstand the wild boar's charge. Fiscal directed lightning element in her hand, crackling. Dealing with a wild boar didn't require using weapons, just a little use of her vision. He let this princess. Before she could finish, a slightly curved steel arrow appeared instantly on the forehead of the large wild boar. Its eyes rolled up, and it fell to the ground immediately. Defeated a powerful enemy, obtained 65 Adventure Express. Wow, it's 3 times stronger than an ordinary wild boar? Although Nolan was surprised, he felt it was within his expectations. Hey! Fiscal puffed up her fair cheeks and glared at him again. This guy always liked to steal the spotlight from this princess. Oh my, miss, it seems like something else has come in, and this time it's not a beast. Ounce reminded everyone. Oh! Nolan looked towards the cave and saw several dimly lit small pyro slimes running into the cave. The fire element on their bodies was likely extinguished by the rain. The current situation rendered them in a state of inactivity and weakness. It would take quite some time for them to recover with sufficient rest. At this moment, even ordinary people could easily handle these pyro slimes. They were bold enough to hold them in their arms for warmth, as long as they weren't afraid of sudden bursts of flames. Moreover, judging by their panicked demeanor, it was likely that the issue wasn't just the storm. Yay! A group of hilly churls, led by a pyro hilly churl chieftain, rushed in, startling the small pyro slimes, causing them to hurriedly run towards the fire pits. It seemed like the hilly churls were trying to capture them. For hilly churls, pyro slimes served many purposes, such as starting fires for cooking, making explosive barrels, and even using them as projectiles for attacks. So, generally, hilly churls would try to catch slimes whenever they saw them, since they were an essential part of their slime technology. Yay! Yay! The hilly churls said something to Nolan and the others. Although no one understood, their hostile intent was obvious from their tone. Do these hilly churls think we're trying to steal their slimes? Ellen, faced with such a dangerous situation, was still somewhat afraid. But thinking that Miss Fiscal and Mr. Nolan, 2 formidable adventurers, were here, she barely managed not to step back. And before them were a pyro hilly churl chieftain and 2 hilly churl shamans leading a group of hilly churls, looking even more formidable than the ones who robbed the gathering team earlier. Be careful, I'll go deal with the 2 hilly churl shamans first. Since he understood the hilly churls' hostility, Nolan naturally wouldn't hesitate to avoid giving them the upper hand. He immediately activated his stealth assassination skill, concealing himself from numerous gazes and silently moving towards the hilly churls while holding his dull blade +20 to control his footsteps. Stealth? Ellen widened her eyes slightly. No need to be surprised. This is just the most basic skill of this princess's reliable attendant. Fiscal raised her chin slightly, summoning her longbow and fitting an arrow onto it. Her fair arm rose to the same height as her shoulders, her legs, wrapped in asymmetrical stockings, spread apart as she stood, and her slightly tilted body caused the black silk fabric on her abdomen, revealing a hint of snowy white skin, to crease slightly. The lightning element gathered at the tip of the arrow, and the purple light attracted the attention of the hilly churls. While preparing to attack, Fiskal also had the effect of making Nolan's actions more covert. Feeling the threat, the Pyro Hilly Churl chieftain swung his axe, which looked like a carriage wheel, towards Fiskal and Ellen. The cave space was narrow, making it extremely difficult to dodge such an attack. Ounce! Fiskal frowned and shouted. Understood, miss. Ounce the Night Raven nodded, spitting out clusters of thundering orb toward the spinning axe of the Pyro Hilly Churl chieftain. The attacks of the thundering orb were dense, easily hitting the edge of the spinning axe. The axe of the Pyro Hilly Churl chieftain was imbued with pyro elements. Under the intertwined thunder and fire, an explosive overload reaction occurred, instantly sending the axe flying out of the hands of the Pyro Hilly Churl chieftain. The Pyro Lawa Churl, who had stopped spinning, stared at his numb arm in a daze. At the same time, Nolan successfully sneaked up behind the two Hilly Churl shamans. With a flash of the blade's chill, a cold sword wind swept past. Splurt! Chapter 104, The Insidious Abyss Mages. Nolan's blade sliced cleanly through the withered necks of the Hilly Churl shamans, meeting scarcely any resistance. The speed of the slash was swift, not even bringing forth a drop of blood. As Nolan moved away from them, heading towards the next Hilly Churl with a bow, they only just noticed him due to the attack. They hurriedly turned around, but it was too late. In the split second they turned, the force sent their unsupported heads flying. Plus 254 Adventure EXP. Plus 246 Adventure EXP. With Princess Fiskal's suppressive fire holding the rampaging Hilly Churl chieftain's undivided focus, the scrawny lesser Hilly Churls proved utterly defenseless against Nolan's stealthy encroachment. Lacking in strength, agility, or any means to resist, they could only crumple as the dull blade pierced flesh with whisper-quiet lethality. Plus 162 Adventure EXP. Plus 171 Adventure EXP. Plus 146 Adventure EXP. After Nolan dealt with all the ordinary Hilly Churls, he looked at the situation on Fiskal's side. To his surprise, the Hilly Churl chieftain was pierced by several flashing arrows of lightning, but they weren't fatal shots, so he hadn't fallen yet. It seemed that Fiskal was intentionally holding back. It appears my stalwart retainer has some fixation with slaying foes by his own hand, Fischel remarked archly, using one delicate hand to brush aside the golden tresses framing her face. Very well, I shall leave the final honor to you. Ever since their journey began, she had harbored a lingering curiosity about Nolan's insistence on personally defeating their adversaries, initially dismissing it as mere playful competitiveness. But as time passed in his company, she sensed something, faintly strange in his motivation. Could her ever-dependable attendant perhaps be afflicted by an eccentric urge to, how did the saying go? Steal kills. After thinking for a while, Fiskal finally found the appropriate adjective and nodded satisfactorily. Nolan delivered the final blow that rendered the Hilly Churl chieftain powerless, piercing its head from behind with the dull blade. Defeated a powerful enemy, obtained 503 Adventure Express. Haha, princess, if you're curious, I'll tell you. Actually, I have a talent that allows me to grow stronger every time I defeat an opponent. Nolan confessed with a joking tone. Most people would probably be suspicious, like Ellen, who had a look of "you really are a strange person." But for Fiskal, Prinzessin der Verartielung, her fair face showed a sudden realization, fully believing without reservation. After all, as the ruler of the Amernachtriuk, effortlessly traveling through various worlds was easy for her. As her reliable attendant, having a bit of extraordinary talent wasn't surprising. Ah, I see now, no wonder you wield such formidable prowess despite lacking a vision. Fiskal put away her weapon, her fair arms crossing over her abdomen covered in mesh black stockings, slightly raising her chest as she spoke with understanding. Miss, perhaps Nolan has a good talent that allows him to gain more insights from defeating opponents. Ounce reminded helplessly. In its understanding, what Nolan said was similar to saying, every time you defeat an opponent, you can see a stronger self, which was a motivational statement. Humph, as the most reliable attendant of this princess, having formidable talent is only natural. Fiskal lifted her face, the golden tips of her hair covering the black eye patch on her forehead, and lightly shook her head. Fiskal has developed good feelings towards you, obtained 150 affection points. Current affection level, LV8, 310/800. It seemed that because Fiskal felt the trust from her reliable attendant in revealing his secret, she slightly increased her affection towards him. Should we get rid of these slimes? Ellen pointed at the flames beside the bonfire where the fire slimes were showing signs of reactivation. Well, considering the rain outside, we probably won't be able to go back for a while. How about we use some rocks to trap them in a circle, then cook something on top of them? We're all pretty hungry by now anyway. In fact, Nolan remembered seeing the hilly churls using fire slimes to cook in their camp earlier, and he found himself intrigued by the idea. That's not a problem. However, I suggest we block the entrance of the cave with something simple, to prevent any more monsters from coming in. Ounce the night raven, who flapped his wings, said after some thought. It wasn't a difficult task, as the cave entrance appeared to be only a little over a meter wide and less than 2 meters high. Using the already dull iron shovel, they dug up some soil to pile up half a meter high, then camouflaged it with branches. It wouldn't take much time. Just as they were about to start, a strange, sinister laughter suddenly came from outside. Kikik, that foolish dragon thinks it can shake us off with the rain, just delaying the inevitable. Another voice followed. But, that pyro mage actually got knocked out cold by the rain. What a nuisance. Let's wait here for it to wake up before we go after that dumb dragon. It seems like an abyss mage's. Nolan and the others immediately associated these inhuman voices with those strange guys. It was Ellen who seemed puzzled this time. Just as she was about to speak up, Fiskal quickly covered her mouth. Ellen widened her eyes in confusion, and Nolan gestured for her to keep quiet. They were at the end of the cave, some distance from the entrance, so the abyss mages hadn't noticed them yet. If they made any noise, it could easily carry outside, just like how they heard the voices at the entrance clearly. From their scheming words, it seemed these maleficent beings harbored sinister designs involving the wind dragon itself. With his foresight, Nolan knew that the Abyss Order indeed wanted to control the wind dragon to help overthrow the Seven Nations. He hadn't expected them to start scheming so soon after the Storm Terror's awakening. Hehe, there seems to be firelight here. Could there be humans hiding here? The subsequent words from the Abyss Mages made everyone slightly startled. They hadn't extinguished the flames on the small bonfire, so it was unsurprisingly spotted. Perhaps it's the hilly churls. We just told them to make some food for us. Hehe. One Abyss Mage chuckled. Indeed, another rasped, its unsettling tones dripping with sadistic relish. And if they prove to be mere humans, we'll simply bind them for that idiot dragon, let it defile its own sacrosanct principles by devouring its former wards. Its final defiance shall crumble, and it will submit to our dominance. Kikikikik. The other Abyss Mage said sinisterly. Nolan frowned deeply upon hearing their words. He hadn't expected these two Abyss Mages to come up with such a deceitful plan. Seeing the impending danger, Nolan signaled to the others. Then, he activated his skills to enter stealth mode, preparing to recreate the surprise attack he had performed on the Abyss Mages in the secret realm earlier. He had heard one of them mention that the shield of the Pyro Mage had been broken, so there was a good chance. Taking out one of them first was the priority. The tunnel in the cave was not long, only a few dozen meters. Nolan soon saw the Abyss Mages in the middle, and his eyes lit up as he let out a sigh of relief. Chapter 105, Trapped in Water, 2 in 1 chapter. 3 Abyss Mages appeared in Nolan's field of vision, one of them being a Hydro Abyss Mage, floating with an elemental shield in front, followed by an Zero Mage. It was dragging an unconscious Pyro Abyss Mage by its foot, flying along the ground. Are they worthy of being called monsters? Even though they have intelligence, they are still rather indifferent emotionally. Didn't they see that the mask of that Pyro Abyss Mage was about to be knocked off? Nolan silently complained. What pleasantly surprised Nolan was that this Zero Abyss Mage, perhaps due to having a companion, hadn't activated its elemental shield. Most likely, its shield couldn't cover 2 Abyss Mages. This gave him an opportunity. Since the Pyro Mage seemed knocked out by the downpour brought by the Storm Terror, all he needed to do was to ambush the Zero Abyss Mage. With that, it would be 3 against 1, or rather, with Ounce, it would be 4 against 1, giving us the advantage. The Abyss Mages were getting closer and closer, leaving him with little time to think. Seeing their somewhat less vigilant demeanor now, Nolan stayed motionless, patiently waiting for the Abyss Mages to approach. Gripping the dull blade tightly, he stilled his very breaths as the shielded Hydro Mage drifted past, mere inches from his concealed position. Inches behind followed the Cryo Mage, obliviously towing its fallen comrade Pyro Mage. Nolan's energy focused, using his max-level sword skills to channel all his strength into his hand. In the next moment, the sword silently pierced through the side of the Zero Abyss Mage's head, like silver frost breaking through space. Instantly, it pierced through the Zero Abyss Mage's head from the side. The foot of the Pyro Abyss Mage slipped from its grasp, landing on the ground with a faint thud. The body of the Zero Abyss Mage trembled twice, trying to turn around but suddenly lost strength and fell to the ground. Defeated a powerful enemy, obtained 1132 Adventure Express. Nolan's eyes widened slightly at the resounding EXP gain notification. Even with the element of surprise, besting such a foe conventionally would have proven immensely arduous. After all, it was an Abyss Mage worth over 1,000 experience points. It might not even break through its shield. He only had one fire-infused arrow left, and no more elemental potions. Was the fickle hand of fate already turning against them on this accursed day? Who dares? The commotion of assassinating the Zero Abyss Mage was quite loud and easily noticed by the nearby Hydro Abyss Mage. It turned its ethereal body around, looking at the fallen Ice Mage with anger in its voice. "You damn human! I'll tear you apart!" It glared at the visible Nolan, feeling extremely angry, not because of the death of its comrade, but because as an elite operative handpicked by the prince for this vital mission, to have such a grievous lapse of awareness that allowed some measly human so near. If it also hadn't activated its elemental shield for some reason, would it, like the foolish Zero Mage, suddenly be killed by humans? Nolan didn't have time to finish off the already unconscious Pyro Abyss Mage. He immediately took 2 steps back, understanding that his swordsmanship would be futile without breaking the Abyss Mage's Hydro Elemental Shield. Die, insect! The Hydro Abyss Mage waved its staff, and a water ball slowly condensed in front of it, then poofed towards him. This speed was within Nolan's reaction range, easily dodged with agile movements. The water ball hit where he had stood, turning into a puddle that seeped into the ground. Seeing this, the Hydro Abyss Mage, seemingly more annoyed, quickly began hurling water balls at Nolan, who had no intention of directly confronting it. He was waiting, biding his time. Midnight Phantasmagoria. A raven shimmering with purple lightning streaked towards the Abyss Mage, bolts of lightning striking it. The water elements on the elemental shield began to react and rapidly deplete against the lightning elements. Unfortunately, Fiscal's elemental burst didn't last long, and soon the elemental energy was depleted. After the raven passed through the Hydro Mage, Fiscal emerged from her fusion with Ounce, appearing next to Nolan. "Oh, this elemental shield is really troublesome," Ounce the raven complained with a somewhat perplexed tone. Seeing Fiscal and Ounce suddenly appear, the Hydro Abyss Mage didn't panic. Instead, it smirked and said, "I knew you humans were cunning. Even those who haven't mastered elemental power dare to attack us, of course, you'd cower behind stronger allies." Its mocking taunts dripped with smug disdain. "Did you naively believe you could fell me with such an amateurish gambit as before? I'm afraid you underestimate the preparations of we Abyss Mages, keek keek." "What?" A slightly surprised expression appeared on Fiscal's fair face. Nolan, looking at the very proud Hydro Abyss Mage, suddenly thought of the water balls that had been attacking but never hit them before. Alarmed, he quickly pressed his hands on Fiscal's fair arm. While feeling the soft touch, he pushed her away with force and said, "Watch your step." "Kakik, it's too late." The Hydro Abyss Mage had long prepared a magic spell in secret, smirking again. "Drown in the water." With a flash of the staff's magical light, the water that had intentionally infiltrated the ground with the earlier water ball attacks gathered, forming a huge water vortex that suddenly rose and swallowed the 2 of them. This astonishing turn of events was too fast to react to. When they came to their senses, they were already underwater. "Miss, Sir Nolan!" Ounce the raven exclaimed, looking at the water sphere that almost occupied the entire tunnel. Because it could fly and was a bit away from the ground, it was fortunate to evade being swallowed by the water sphere. It looked at the 2 submerged in the water sphere and quickly understood. It couldn't rush in to save the 2 directly, or it would likely get trapped too. To prevent the 2 from suffocating underwater, the only way was to defeat the Hydro Abyss Mage and cut off the power source maintaining the magical water sphere. Keek keek. "Foolish humans, you face one of the Abyss Order's elite, an operative whose guile and prowess earned the prince's own commendations." The mage's mocking laughter echoed hollowly around them, refracting through the rippling aqueous barrier. "His Highness himself entrusted me to lead this crucial operation to subjugate that stupid dragon. You truly believed some childish ploy could avail you before my incomparable mastery. The Hydro Abyss Mage became more and more agitated as it spoke, evidently reminded of how the petty human trick had successfully taken down one of its companions. Just as it was about to launch magic to accelerate the suffocation of the two humans, suddenly its water elemental shield flickered, emitting a burst of lightning. "Damn you! You little black bird!" The Hydro Abyss Mage retorted at Ounce, who kept spitting out magic bullets of thunder. The thunder bullets and water balls collided midway, cancelling each other out. "Release them at once, fiend!" Ounce, flapping its wings, unleashed a barrage of attacks at the Hydro Mage. Feeling the rapid depletion of its water balls against the attacks, the Hydro Abyss Mage realized that if this continued, it would be drained of strength by the black bird. With this in mind, it suddenly disappeared in place, magically blinking outside the cave. It wasn't trying to escape because if it got too far, it wouldn't be able to maintain the water sphere trapping the two humans. Unlike the Pyro Abyss Mage needing to dodge the rain, as a Hydro Abyss Mage, it actually expended less magic in a rainstorm, given the abundant water elements in such an environment. If the Cryo Abyss Mage hadn't died, this heavy rain would have been the perfect auxiliary combat environment for it, freezing enemies with a single strike. Ounce noticed the Abyss Mage's appearance outside the cave and swiftly flapped its wings to pursue it. Submerged in water, Nolan felt every inch of his skin chill. Fortunately, he had grown up in the countryside, where there was a river nearby. During summers, he often played in the water with his friends. Of course, adults from the village were always supervised, as children couldn't play by the river alone. Anyway, he learned to swim at a very young age, so being trapped underwater by the Abyss Mage didn't panic him too much. Fiscal was in front of him, her golden hair floating in the water as if weightless, her purple-black interwoven skirt also lifted by buoyancy. Her wet black stockings clung to her soft legs, and her snow-white skin was faintly visible. Her right eye, not covered by the eye patch, met Nolan's gaze. She blinked, slightly puffed her cheeks, and occasionally let out a bubble from her closed lips, shaking her head to indicate she was fine. Indeed, as an adventurer, not being able to swim would be unacceptable. After confirming the status of the two, Nolan swam towards the edge of the water sphere, trying to break free. Somewhat regretfully, the water sphere was indeed entirely water. The dull blade could easily pierce through it, just like stabbing from underwater to the surface. But when Nolan tried to reach out, he was blocked by a water blue magic array. It was no accident, it was undoubtedly the cunning of the Abyss Mage. The goal was to prevent them from breaking free. Moreover, Fiscal didn't dare to guide the lightning elements underwater. After all, it would cause an electric reaction with the water elements, potentially electrocuting them. If their bodies were paralyzed, losing control of their breath-holding actions, they would inevitably inhale water, which would be troublesome. In this regard, this Hydro Abyss Mage, both in terms of intellect and strength, was more formidable than other mages Nolan had encountered before. It seemed that the Abyss Order didn't send a weakling to attempt to control the Storm Terror. Now things were in trouble. If this continued, they would soon suffocate. Relying on his robust physical fitness and the blessing of the abundant life specialization, Nolan could barely hold out for a little longer. But even though Fiscal was a holder of the vision and was powerful, breath holding was related to lung capacity and physical endurance. Although she hadn't reached the second ascent yet, in terms of breath holding, she might be a bit better than ordinary people, but she might not be able to hold out for long. In this situation, they could only wait for Ounce to defeat the Hydro Abyss Mage as quickly as possible, or hope that Ellen would come and pull them out from the outside. 2 minutes later, Nolan didn't feel much discomfort, but the bubbles leaking from Fiscal's tightly closed lips had visibly increased. However, her expression remained calm, indicating that she should be able to hold on easily. At this moment, Ellen, deeper inside the cave, also noticed their predicament and cautiously approached to avoid detection by the Abyss Mage. Chapter 106, Oxygen Replenishment. Outside the cave, lightning clashed with torrents, eventually dissipating and shattering into nothingness. The Night Raven gathered lightning elements around its body. After darting through the downpour, it left behind a trail of arcs jumping with electrical charges. Ounce's wings, radiating with lightning, spun rapidly, enveloping raindrops in a whirlwind akin to a thunderstorm, heading straight for the Hydro Abyss Mage. With a swing of its staff, the Water Mage immediately conjured several water balls to block the path. Absorbing copious amounts of water elements from the rain, which seemed even more immense than the sphere trapping Nolan and Fiscal, Ounce could only maneuver around them. It wanted to directly attack the Hydro Abyss Mage. Even with the environmental advantage, the water mage didn't dare to confront this strike head-on. It launched another spell, teleporting away from its original position, appearing behind Ounce and instantly conjuring a magical water bubble in front of it. This wasn't a trapping spell like the water ball, which gathered a large amount of water elements, it was a slow-moving attack that seemed harmless. Its main purpose was to provoke contempt from the enemy. If Ounce dared to charge directly, it would experience the suffocation sensation similar to being trapped by the water ball. Ounce easily discerned the problem and casually released a lightning bolt to destroy the water bubble. "I didn't expect you, Blackbird, to be so powerful. Serve the Abyss Order, as humans are not your destiny," the Water Abyss Mage said in a coaxing tone. "I am a servant of the Miss, not like you infamous abyssal creatures." Ounce continued to counterattack with magical lightning bolts. "If that's the case, then sink with them in the water." The Water Mage lightly tapped its staff in the air, and the surrounding rain, seemingly under its control, transformed into a fierce maw, sweeping towards Ounce. Ellen approached the water sphere, trapping the two inside the cave. Guided by Nolan and Fiskal's body language, she quickly understood that they needed her to try to pull them out. Although a bit scared that she might be swallowed too, she deemed it worth the risk to save her two companions. Ellen took a deep breath and reached out towards the water sphere, effortlessly slipping inside as if touching the water's surface. And then, there was no situation of her being sucked in as well. With a joyful smile on her face, Ellen made no sound that would attract the Hydro Mage's attention, grabbing Fiskal's hand and pulling backward with all her might. But the worrisome thing still happened. That was the situation where one could come in from the outside, but not leave from the inside. It was still that watercolored magic array that blocked Fiskal's hand from being pulled out. Seeing this, Nolan's mood sank a little. This magic, coupled with the water ball trapping them, should, without a doubt, be cast inside the water sphere. It wouldn't be able to automatically identify targets, right? If that Abyss Mage had such mastery of magic, there would be no need to go through the trouble of trapping them with a water ball. Therefore, Nolan felt that the solution to breaking the water ball should still lie on the outside. But like Ellen, he had no means to influence water elements. Perhaps, by using elements that wouldn't affect them but could disturb the magic utilizing water elements, they might disrupt this spell. Although in an oxygen-deprived environment, Nolan's brain still maintained a good level of clarity. As he continued to ponder, his mind raced with ideas. Suddenly realizing that since lightning elements could electrify oneself, perhaps trying to attack with fire elements might work. The evaporation reaction between fire and water elements wouldn't instantly consume the entire water sphere, allowing for an attack on them. But it might be enough to disrupt the functioning of the magic. Outside, there were several small slimes. So, brought them over and used the flames from the bonfire to absorb them, bringing them back to an active state. Given the strong territorial instincts of monsters, they would likely attack Nolan and the others when they were so close. By doing so, they might be able to disrupt this water sphere magic. There didn't seem to be any other way, so they had to let Ellen give it a try. Nolan utilized every means possible to convey his body language. Fortunately, it wasn't anything difficult to express. Ellen, being clever, grasped it in less than a minute and immediately took action. At the same time, Nolan felt a tug on his sleeve. Turning around, he saw it was Fiskal. Beneath her drifting golden hair in the water, her fair face looked slightly bluish, showing signs of discomfort. Bubbles occasionally escaped her lips. Her legs, clad in black stockings, weakly sank to the bottom of the water sphere, with the magic array appearing to prevent her from sinking further. Fiskal naturally brought her legs together and bent her knees, pressing her legs against each other and slightly apart, displaying the soft curves of her calves against the stockings as she squatted down. It seemed she had been holding her breath for so long that she was nearing her limit. If she continued like this, she would lose consciousness due to lack of oxygen. However, there was a solution to this situation because Nolan still had enough oxygen in his body. He could share some through a kiss. The intense suffocation made Fiskal extremely uncomfortable. Catching sight of her reliable attendant pointing at her lips, she hesitated for a moment, then widened her eyes in realization. Shortly after, she felt her face flush slightly. While kissing was usually something reserved for lovers. But in a dangerous emergency like this, it was also a crucial first aid technique. So, there was nothing to be embarrassed about. Moreover, if it was a reliable attendant, it didn't seem so embarrassing. Driven by the suffocating sensation, Fiskal's mind became somewhat muddled. Nolan looked at Fiskal's pale, bluish face, which now had a slight blush. She nodded her head slightly. After getting the consent, Nolan didn't feel surprised. After all, her affection towards himself had reached the 8th level. He came to Fiskal, crouched down, held her chin with both hands, lifted it slightly, and leaned his lips toward the girl's softer ones. Fiskal tried to maintain a calm demeanor and averted her gaze. This was Nolan's first experience feeling a girl's lips. Could warmth be transmitted even underwater? After slightly parting Fiskal's lips, Nolan felt the oxygen in his body rush out as if finding an exit, causing him to start feeling a bit suffocated. The process of replenishing oxygen was quick. Just now, due to embarrassment, his heartbeat had accelerated, consuming more oxygen. Fiskal, who had been feeling even more uncomfortable, finally began to gradually ease up. She calmly separated her lips from Nolan's, turned her head as if nothing had happened, leaving him with a view of her fair profile. Glancing towards the entrance of the cave, one could faintly discern the figures of the Water Mage and the Night Raven still locked in battle. But from the several affection points recorded in the character panel just now, Nolan could understand that her current mood was not as calm as it seemed. Fiskal has developed good feelings towards you, obtain 600 affection points. Current affection level, LV.9, 110/900. Perhaps this was due to her muddled thoughts, instinctively trying to convince herself that there was nothing wrong with kissing her attendant in an emergency situation. Automatically recalling many things, she might even have noticed Nolan's shining points in their usual interactions. And now, with the alleviation of the suffocation symptoms, as a girl, Fiskal couldn't help but associate kissing with lovers. Therefore, beneath her calm expression, her mind was actually wandering, unknowingly increasing her fondness for Nolan with each of his repeated gestures. Fiskal has developed good feelings towards you, obtain 200 affection points. Current affection level, LV.9, 310/900. Fiskal has developed good feelings towards you, obtain 350 affection points. Current affection level, LV.9, 660/900. Fiskal has developed good feelings towards you, obtain 250 affection points. Current affection level, LV.10, max. Chapter 107, Maxed Out Affection. Was he finally going to receive the blessing of the first seat of Archon ability? What would it be? Nolan thought with great anticipation. He had thought this process would take a bit longer since the increase in affection was generally unpredictable, largely dependent on the subjective will of the other person. Like the times when he was still a student. Encountering a beautiful female classmate on the way to school, even without knowing her, would probably raise his affection points by several hundred. Thus, although he didn't know Fiskal's feelings towards him, considering her affection was already close to max, coupled with the mouth-to-mouth resuscitation that pushed things further, it didn't seem too surprising to have reached max affection. As he pondered, the prompt on the character panel appeared. With your sincere heart and persistent efforts, you have deeply connected with a destiny that was originally unrelated to you. From now on, the maiden star will shine alongside yours, granting you the ability, grand illusory dreamscape of myriad forms, Eye of Judgment. Oh? Nolan looked at the information that popped up on the panel with some surprise. This ability should just have been Fiskal's fantasy, but he actually received it upon maxing out Favor ability. It did seem to fit the special characteristic of little Amy, or Fiskal herself. Nolan read the ability's description. Grand illusory dreamscape of myriad forms, Eye of Judgment, this is the most beautiful blessing from the maiden to you. Upon activation, your pupils turn golden, allowing you to easily see through illusions, trace elemental signs, and perceive the strength and weaknesses of targets. The intensity is based on the combined levels of you and Fiskal, with no extra consumption. Wow! That doesn't look too bad, kind of like an upgraded version of elemental vision with other better features. It's a bit of a shame that it doesn't have an attack, it's all about support. The fact that there's no extra usage consumption is great, meaning he could use it just like he would his normal sight, except for getting tired if he overused it, without any other consumptions. The intensity equaling the combined levels of both is also interesting. Nolan is currently level 24, while for Fiskal. Thinking this, he activated the Eye of Judgment and looked towards Fiskal, his black pupils gradually shifting to a golden hue like Amy's hair. The first thing that entered his new field of vision was Fiskal's floating golden hair and the snow-white back not covered by her black skirt. Then, looking upward, a number similar to his level appeared, level 37. It seemed the Eye of Judgment used Nolan as a benchmark, displaying Fiskal's strength in a clear and straightforward manner. Quite convenient, as there was no need for Nolan to spend extra effort understanding. A glance made it clear that Fiskal was nearly reaching her second ascending in strength. Nolan's 24 plus Fiskal's 37 meant his Eye of Judgment could discern the strength and weaknesses of targets up to level 61. Moreover, it would continue to grow as both of their strengths improved, very satisfying and not disappointing at all. At this moment, Ellen approached with a small bonfire stand, enticing several dim, small pyro slimes over. Nolan directed her to place the bonfire stand horizontally at the bottom of the water orb. The flames scorched the water orb, and indeed, through his golden Eye of Judgment, he could clearly see the orderly water elemental forces inside the orb reacting with the fire elements to evaporate, already slightly affecting the magical water orb. Unfortunately, the flames from the bonfire stand weren't enough to break through the magic circle, it required the pyro slimes' assistance. The pyro slimes, already nearly recovered inside, immediately approached the fire to hasten their recovery upon seeing the flames. As time gradually passed, the pyro slimes gradually recovered, and Ellen withdrew in advance to avoid becoming a target. It didn't take long before the pyro slimes transitioned from a dark reddish molten hue to a blazing orange color, signifying they had recovered from their dampened spirits after the rain. The euphoric pyro slimes bounced around a bit higher, then made contact with the overhead water sphere. SSS. A sound reminiscent of flames being extinguished filled the air. This particular pyro slime, having encountered its disliked element of water once again, looked up somewhat disgruntled, only to find two humans gazing down at it. Its low intelligence simply perceived the humans as attackers, enraging it completely. Its oval eyes bulged as fire elements coalesced within its bouncy round body, before violently spewing out a continuous volley of small fireballs that bombarded the magic water sphere. Through Nolan's golden eyes, the elemental trajectories within the water orb became chaotic, and the magic circle under his feet flickered uncertainly. The magic's operation, reliant on water elemental force, was compromised by the evaporation reaction consuming a portion of it. A fault in one component often presages the total collapse of the whole system. The other two fire slimes noticed their comrades' attack and joined with their own strings of fireballs. As more water elements evaporated away, the magic array under Nolan and Fiskal's feet vanished completely, dropping them from the water sphere onto the earthen ground. The startled pyro slimes had no chance to react before the next second. The magic water sphere utterly collapsed, dumping massive amounts of water that went splosh. The few fire slimes unable to dodge were drenched again, their orange-red bodies dimming as they panically fled. Humph! Considering you helped greatly, this princess won't beat you up anymore. Fiskal's snowy white hands rested on her hips as she raised her chin proudly towards the fleeing slimes. Drenched from head to toe, her beautiful long hair clung to her back without a hint of fluffiness, and streaks of water trailed down from her golden hair tips, outlining the soft curves of her buttocks through her black silk undergarment, before merging into the long tail of her dress and eventually dropping to the ground. Having recovered from the earlier events, Fiskal had returned to her usual self. Not only were the slimes affected by the water, but a Pyro Abyss Mage abandoned by the Hydro Abyss Mage also seemed on the verge of awakening from its stupor due to the cold shock. Nolan's dull blade turned, his golden eyes settling on the Pyro Mage, and soon bright spots of light appeared on its head and heart area. Indeed, most monsters' vulnerabilities did not escape the brain and heart. After testing the Eye of Judgment's ability to discern weaknesses, Nolan thrust his sword towards the mage's forehead, penetrating without resistance as blood dripped down the blade. Defeated a powerful enemy, obtained 1214 Adventure Express. It seemed the ability to perceive weaknesses had limited effect on common monsters since the brain and heart being vulnerabilities was quite evident without it. Princess, let's go outside and join Ounce in dealing with the remaining enemy. Nolan suggested to Fiskal as she picked up the hem of her dress. Fiskal wrung the water-soaked fabric in her hands, releasing a cascade of water onto the cave floor, splattering some mud onto her delicate, damp black stockings. Her pale face broke into a slight smile. Humph! This princess must make it taste drowning too. Chapter 108, Resolution. Say, why have your eyes turned golden? Fiskal crossed her arms under her chest, a hint of puzzlement on her face as the drenched black silk bodysuit clung uncomfortably to her skin. Nolan smiled at her and joked, well, this is the same grand illusory dreamscape of myriad forms, Eye of Judgment as yours, princess. It seems to have come from that kiss just now. Don't you have any clue either? I thought it was a gift from you, princess. Hearing Nolan's explanation, Fiskal's face reddened, then she retorted somewhat angrily, "Idiot! How could I possibly impart my unique ability to you? That must be a fake. A cheap imitation." "Ah, it seems so. My eyes, compared to yours, your highness, which can easily see through the changes in fate, the connections of cause and effect, and even distant worlds, are definitely far inferior." Nolan didn't argue with Fiscal and simply admitted defeat and said, "As long as you know." Fiscal nodded in satisfaction, then grabbed her weapon and headed towards the cave entrance. Since her reliable attendant was unwilling to elaborate, she decided not to pursue it for the time being. After all, being soaked, she needed to defeat the enemy first to avoid catching a cold, change into dry clothes, and then she could inquire about his eyes. After all, she was indeed somewhat curious. When they came to the entrance of the cave, it was still storming majestically outside, but this time it didn't matter. After all, there wasn't a dry spot on the two at all. Night Raven Ounce and the Hydro Abyss Mage, still entangled in battle, noticed Nolan and Fiscal immediately. "Thank goodness, Miss, Sir Nolan, you're all right." Night Raven Ounce dodged a water arrow and exclaimed. "How is this possible?" The Hydro Abyss Mage, hovering midair with its staff, voiced its disbelief. That was a binding magic it had prepared for a long time. Only someone with comparable strength could have possibly broken out from inside. Nolan's golden eyes fixed on the Hydro Abyss Mage, and a bright number appeared above its head. Level, 46. No wonder this water mage gave them so much trouble, its level was a staggering 46. Nolan felt a tinge of surprise. He also glanced at Night Raven Ounce, noticing its level was the same as Fiscal's, both at 37. Makes sense, after all, it is her familiar. Daring to entrap this princess with petty tricks. Fiscal pulled back her bowstring, arrow knocked, as lightning began to gather at the arrowhead. Looking down her arm, one could see transparent droplets clinging to the snow-white skin of her underarm. One drop, guided by gravity, slowly slid down her delicate skin to a spot on her ribcage hidden by her short skirt. At the same moment, Fiscal's arrow shot towards the Hydro Abyss Mage, trailing a path like lightning. If hit, the massive amount of electro-elements attached to the arrow would, unsurprisingly, significantly deplete the Hydro Mage's elemental shield. Keek, too slow. With a twirl of its staff, the Hydro Abyss Mage teleported a few meters away, dodging Fiscal's attack, but Ounce, already prepared, continued to fire a barrage of electro-magic bullets at it. Fiscal was betting on the fact that its spatial teleportation magic couldn't be used in rapid succession. "You pesky humans are so annoying." A barrage of lightning bolts successfully hit the water mage's elemental shield but failed to break it. The creature cackled and continued, "What's the point of hitting if the electrocution reaction consumes less water element than I can recover?" Nolan's brow furrowed slightly. This torrential downpour was certainly a huge advantage for it. He looked again at the water abyss mage with golden eyes, the same hue as Fiscal's hair, and unexpectedly found its weakness not in its head or heart, but in the water elemental shield surrounding it. A point of light, bright as the rays of the sun, moved continuously on the elemental shield. This was probably because the shield prevented attacks from reaching the water mage's body, making its weaknesses invisible. This rapidly moving point on the shield could be a node of magical operation or something similar. Focusing attacks on it, compared to other areas, would undoubtedly break the shield faster. Nolan quickly picked up the adventurer hunting bow and used the last remaining fire-imbued arrow, his gaze slightly condensed aiming at the light spot on the water elemental shield. The next moment, the arrow streaked through the wind and rain unimpeded, erupting in flames to perfectly strike the water mage's elemental shield with a whoosh. The elemental shield visibly wobbled, almost falling apart. The water mage, startled, widened its eyes in surprise, but ultimately the shield held, allowing it to breathe a sigh of relief. "No good?" "Seemed just a bit more was needed," Nolan said with some regret. Calling it a weakness didn't mean it was easily breakable. If the average strength of the elemental shield was 100, and one spot was 99.9, then relatively speaking, it was a weakness. This made seeing the weakness less impactful, but fortunately, this abyss mage didn't fall under that category. Nolan believed that one more hit would successfully break the shield. But he was out of fire-imbued arrows, to his dismay. "You idiot, I can just imbue your arrows with lightning, can't I?" Fiscal stepped on Nolan with her high-heeled black boots, urgently saying with a fair face. If they waited any longer, the water mage's shield would fully recover. Alright. He had Bennett try this before, it totally worked, he just momentarily forgot. Nolan hurriedly loaded an armor-piercing arrow as Fiscal extended her hand, guiding the lightning element to slowly adhere to it. Seeing this, the Water Abyss Mage spoke with a mix of shock and anger. Humans! You shall not succeed! But it was too late. Fiscal, being an archer, was far more adept at infusing elemental power into arrows than Bennett. A lightning elemental arrow, unimaginably fast, hit the Water Mage's shield at its weak point again. The shield, crackling with electric light, disintegrated in an instant. Ah! The Hydro Abyss Mage was hit by magical backlash, groaning in pain as it passed out and fell from the air to the ground. Defeated a powerful enemy, obtained 1953 Adventure Express. We finally did it. Nolan wiped the rain off his forehead with the back of his hand, exhaling in relief. All thanks to this princess. Fiscal, with her palm wet from the rain, patted her heaving chest, then stood with hands on hips, her fingertips pressing against the soaked, skin-tight black bodysuit clinging to her abdomen, slightly indenting the soft, white flesh. Chapter 109, Lumen and Paimon. The sky dimmed, and the rain poured heavily. After the Hydro Abyssal Mage fainted, it was useless to keep it and was directly killed by Nolan's sword. Then he extracted a rare material called dead ley line leaves from its staff. Fiscal checked her silver pocket watch. It was already 5 in the afternoon, approaching evening. She used her fingers to lift the leather garter strap of her black thigh-high stockings, letting the water stains, which had accumulated underneath, trickle away, relieving the slight itching sensation on her skin. Now there was no other way, they had to prepare to spend the night in the cave. Before that, they needed to gather some branches to camouflage the entrance of the cave, to prevent unintelligent beasts and monsters from intruding again. If it was daytime, Nolan would have preferred encountering more monsters to earn Adventure EXP, but it would be more troublesome at night since darkness greatly affected visibility. Even with the golden eyes of judgment, visibility was only slightly better at night, it didn't reach the level of night vision. Anyway, the matter of collecting tree branches is very simple. Since they were already drenched, they could venture into the nearby small forest to pick up some dead branches and leaves. If they were insufficient, they could even swing their swords to cut down some branches from the trees. Miss, the recent battle has exhausted me. I need to rest for a while. Ounce the night raven, who was flapping his wings, said. Very well, you may withdraw. This princess grants you permission. Fiscal nodded with a smile on her fair face. After receiving permission, Ounce transformed into lightning and dashed into the purple vision. Although it was possible to rest outside, it wasn't as effective as being in the vision. However, just as they were about to take action, 2 white figures hurriedly ran out from the forest. Traveler, look, there's a cave here, and someone's inside. Let's take shelter from the rain. A creature with golden crown like floating above its head, resembling a humanoid fairy with pure white hair, pointed ahead with its finger. The other blonde-haired figure who was holding a large green leaf on her head, called the traveler, nodded softly. She hadn't expected that, despite the clear weather earlier, it would suddenly rain heavily. In her haste, she could only find a leaf to shield her head. Obviously, it was ineffective, and they had already been drenched. Nolan looked at the 2 running towards them with surprise and astonishment. Wasn't that Lumen and Paimon? What a coincidence to meet them here. Thinking carefully, as the protagonists of the game, they did indeed appear around the same time as the Wind Dragon. It seemed that after Lumen woke up, she wandered in the wild for a while and finally accidentally fished Paimon out of the sea outside the Fallen Star Valley while fishing. Lumen saved Paimon, they became friends, and she also mentioned the incident where her brother was captured by an unknown god. As a result, Paimon agreed to be her guide, accompanying her to tour every nation in Teyvat, vowing to find the god who took her brother and rescue him. And it seemed that Nolan and the others just happened to be on their way to the city of Monstadt, coinciding with a rainstorm, and there was a cave here as well, so it made sense that they would meet in such a way. You guys are. Nolan did not show too much abnormality towards the 2 people who came in the cave. Although he knew them, Lumen and Paimon didn't recognize him. To avoid unnecessary trouble, it was better to treat them as strangers they happened to encounter. Hee. Are you guys also hiding here because of the heavy rain? Floating in the air with eyes resembling a starry sky, Paimon first asked a question, then pointed to herself and the golden-haired girl beside her, introducing them. She's Lumen, a traveler, and I'm Paimon, her guide. Hello. The girl with 2 white flower petals on her head smiled and said to Nolan and Fiscal. I am Fiscal, the Princess of Condemnation. I accept your friendly greetings. Fiscal flipped her wet hair to the side arrogantly in response. Nolan felt slightly helpless. No wonder little Amy had few friends. Every time she conversed with strangers like this, they basically had no desire to communicate in depth. Princess. Paimon separated her thumb and forefinger, touching her chin with a puzzled expression. Isn't Monstadt governed by the Knights of Favonius? How can there still be a royal family? Humph, what is Monstadt? Even the entirety of Teyvat cannot compare to the world ruled by this princess, the ultimate destination of all things in the universe, the Amernachtriac. Fiscal said, hands on her hips, with a slight hint of pride. What? You're also from outside this world? Paimon covered her mouth with both hands in astonishment. Also. Fiscal raised an eyebrow in confusion. No, well. Paimon realized she had let slip something she shouldn't have. After all, even if she was going to help the traveler find her brother, it wasn't like she had to bring up Lumen coming from outside the world with two strangers who had met in passing. Spreading it around the continent wouldn't benefit Lumen, it would only invite trouble. So, in the original story, while many people knew she was looking for her brother, only a small number were aware that she came from outside the world. Lumen sighed, looking at Paimon helplessly. This guide seemed a bit clueless. Having traveled through many worlds, she had seen all kinds of people. She could tell that this girl with golden hair, wearing a black eye patch, was simply indulging in a fantasy world and playing a similar role in reality. Haha, if there's anything you find difficult to say, you don't have to worry about this question. She was just asking casually. Nolan didn't want the atmosphere to become too awkward and intervened. Sure enough, while Paimon was indeed the best companion for a traveler, she could sometimes be a bit silly. She had let slip. Now I, a stranger, have to help you wrap it up. You're really nice. Then I won't say anything. Paimon visibly relaxed upon hearing his words, patting her white hair and saying. Paimon has developed good feelings towards you, obtained 90 affection points. Current affection level, LV1, 90/100. Lumen placed her hands on the sides of her drenched white backless dress, thinking for a moment. These two people in front of her didn't seem like bad people. It would be better to explain a bit to prevent them from suspecting her and becoming wary. It's not a big deal to tell you. I just hope you won't tell others after hearing it. Lumen smiled and said. Then she told them her and her brother's story, only mentioning that she did indeed come from outside the continent of Teyvat and was looking for her brother abducted by an unknown god. Revealing too much secrecy wasn't suitable for telling ordinary people. Fiscal, upon hearing this answer, was also visibly surprised. Nolan hadn't expected her to actually say it, so he could only promise not to reveal it to anyone else. Lumen has developed good feelings towards you, obtained 60 affection points. Current affection level, LV1, 60/100. With Lumen's assurance, Nolan nodded, and then joined Ellen and the others in gathering branches and covering the cave. After learning that the enemies had been dealt with, Ellen, who was digging some soil with a dull iron shovel, briefly introduced herself to Lumen and Paimon. Then, she piled up some mud at the entrance of the cave, planning to stack it half a meter high. In addition to securing the branches, it could also block the wind and rain, as well as snakes, insects, and ants. With Lumen and Paimon's help, the work was completed much faster than expected. Now it was time to quickly change out of their soaked clothes. Chapter 110, Eye of the Storm. At the end of the cave, there's a slightly drier place. The group once again expanded the circle of 3 bonfires to encompass an area of about 5 or 6 square meters. In the center, they erected 2 tents for their expedition and constructed a circular stove out of branches and sticks. Inside the stove, 3 pyro slimes fit snugly, now knocked unconscious by Nolan's sword hilt. With sources of warmth both in the middle and around, the storm raging outside seemed far less cold here. This place had become a qualified small camp. Everyone should change out of their clothes soon, or we'll catch a cold. Ellen, the only one not soaked, said with concern. I've been feeling uncomfortable all over for a while now. Paimon, floating midair and dripping with water, nodded vigorously with a smile. But, we don't have any clothes, do we? Lumen said, lifting her right foot to remove her white thigh-high boots, revealing her delicate and soft snowy legs. Then, she hung her boots on the simple drying rack made of branches and sticks by Nolan. The slanted cut of the boot's inner side seemed to harbor an ocean, with endless drops of water falling. She had been wandering outdoors since awakening, where else would she get another set of clothes? Oh, right. Paimon covered her head, slightly troubled. That's easy to handle. You two go inside the tent and take off your clothes, wrap yourselves in thin blankets, and I'll take care of drying them. Ellen was very friendly to the two new acquaintances she had just met. All right, that's the only option. Lumen and Paimon exchanged glances and nodded, feeling through their interactions so far that these people were trustworthy. Meanwhile, Fiscal had already changed in one of the tents, now wearing a sleeveless black tank top and light, knee-length shorts. Since her short boots were also wet, she had no choice but to walk barefoot on the ground until they dried. Fortunately, the ground here was not too damp, and with the fires around, walking barefoot wasn't cold or uncomfortable. As for Nolan, he was out of options. His damaged backpack didn't carry any spare clothes, so he had to stay in his wet clothes. Uncomfortable, yes, but with his robust constitution, he wasn't likely to fall ill because of it. Meanwhile, as the girls busied themselves with changing, Nolan took the time to process a wild boar he had initially defeated with his sword. With his superior sword skills, he had no problem slicing the meat into crystal-clear thin slices. After consulting everyone's preference, the decision was made to prepare large chunks of pan-fried pork and pork soup. Fiscal's vision contained pots, utensils, and some seasonings. With a pool of water under the cave and the rain outside, there was no issue obtaining clean water. Thus, all conditions were met, and soon enough, the pork and soup were ready, filling the cave with a tantalizing aroma. Wow! That smells delicious! Paimon poked her head out from the tent, almost drooling at the mouth. Paimon, show some restraint. A white hand reached out from inside and pressed her head back down. Don't worry, your clothes will be dry soon. Just a bit more drying and they'll be fine. Ellen stood by one of the campfires, saying this. On the simple rack made of branches and sticks, besides Lumen's backless dress and thigh-high boots, there were also white lantern shorts worn under the dress and a wrap-around chest garment. As Nolan had been tending to the simmering soup and searing meat beside the slime-fueled campfire for quite some time, he noticed his own clothes had dried out as well. Night had completely fallen. The group of 5 sat around the slime furnace, each savoring a full bowl of meat soup. The warmth seemed to seep into their very bones, spreading a cozy warmth throughout their bodies. This is fantastic, to think we could enjoy such delicious food in the wilderness. Paimon, adorned with a golden crown, exclaimed joyously, fluttering in mid-air. Well, the grilled meat is a tad salty for my taste, Ellen commented, chewing on a piece of meat, offering her personal take. The soup is really delicious. Glowing with her amber-hued pupils, Lumen glanced at Nolan and spoke. My culinary skills are modest, there's certainly room for improvement, Nolan replied with a smile. After all, he wasn't a chef dedicated to the culinary arts, so an occasional misstep was not surprising. The princess here finds it quite satisfactory. Fiscal, placing a round bowl filled with hot soup on her snow-white thighs, gently held it, feeling the warmth transferring to her, shared her thoughts. As laughter and chatter filled the air, the atmosphere of friendly acquaintanceship made time seem like an adjusted pocket watch, swiftly passing by. By morning, the torrential rain from the previous afternoon had already ceased. Brilliant sunlight pierced through the clouds once more, illuminating the faces of the group now standing at the cave's entrance. Miss Lumen, are you heading to Monstadt next? Ellen inquired, looking towards Lumen and Paimon. Yep, after all, she's still searching for her brother. Paimon, hands clasped behind her back, revealed a smile, while Lumen silently nodded in agreement. In that case, this is where we part ways. We still have one last matter to attend to, Nolan said with a smile. He was talking about going to the windmill chrysanthemum garden indicated on the treasure map. It seemed to be located near the Cape Oath, right beside the Starfell Valley. And since they were already here, it made sense to check it out. It would save them the time it would take to travel there again in the future. Ah, well then, let's hope we have the chance to dine together again in Monstadt. Paimon chuckled. That would be no issue. As an investigator for the Adventurers Guild, just mention it to Catherine, and she'll find me, Fiscal said, donning her skirt from the night before, confidently placing her hands on her waist. Catherine. Lumen repeated, puzzled. She's the receptionist at the Adventurers Guild, Miss Lumen, Night Raven Ounce, who had reappeared and was now in fine shape, explained on behalf of his mistress. "I see." Lumen blinked her ember eyes in understanding, then waved goodbye, continuing towards Monstadt city under Paymon's guidance. Nolan and the others watched as their figures disappeared from view before setting off themselves, following the treasure map's directions. The wilderness, in the aftermath of the storm, was notably devoid of wild beasts or monsters, encountering only a few water slimes by noon as they arrived at the Windmill Chrysanthemum Garden. Nolan, activating his golden eyes of judgment, noted their levels were around 7 or 8, hardly worth much Adventure EXP, so he let Ellen practice. "Hey? That said, isn't this place called Windmill Chrysanthemum Garden? How come there isn't even a single windmill chrysanthemum?" Ellen observed the grassy plain in front of them, indistinguishable from the rest of the Monstadt region. There is no way this princess could be mistaken about the location. Fiscal huffed imperiously, hands crossed below her chest, swathed in a black velvet underdress, the raven ounce flapping at her side. "Ah, perhaps some mischievous little creature is to blame." A light laughter intertwined with the gentle breeze reached their ears before they could react. Suddenly, the breeze turned into a fierce windstorm. A strange creature, with a green orb at its center, a hard shell surrounding it, and visibly carrying wind elements around it, appeared before them. Eye of the Storm. Having played the game, Nolan immediately recognized this monster, surprised to encounter it here. He looked up with his golden eyes, and a number floated above it. Level 43. Chapter 111, The Passing Bard, 2 in 1 chapter. At Windwatch, Windmill Chrysanthemum Garden. An Eye of the Storm, encased in a tough shell, materialized before Nolan and his companions, its power level of 43 slightly below that of the Abyss Hydro Mage they had encountered earlier. Yet, underestimating this foe would not be the mark of a seasoned adventurer. "Everyone, be cautious. Ellen, you move back first." Nolan, while keeping an eye on the Eye of the Storm swirling above, seriously advised Ellen. "All right, you all be careful too." Ellen understood that facing such a formidable enemy, she would only be a burden here, so retreating to avoid causing trouble was the best option. "Ounce, go." Fiscal summoned her stringless bow, twirling it gently in her hand. "Understood, miss." Flapping his wings interwoven with the colors of the night, Ounce flew like lightning to a high altitude opposite the Eye of the Storm, and then launched a thunderbolt attack. At the same time, Fiscal, her legs clad in asymmetrical black stockings slightly apart, raised her right arm to pull back the bowstring. Arrows stored within the vision first appeared on the bow as points of light before materializing into ordinary arrows, with lightning beginning to gather at their tips. The next second, the electro-imbued shaft arced through a violet trail towards the hovering Eye of the Storm. Perhaps due to Fiscal's power not quite matching up to the Eye of the Storm, the arrow's lightning was dissipated by the whirlwind surrounding it before even making contact with its body. The now ordinary arrow was likewise casually flicked away like a leaf in the wind. "TCH, looks like I'll need to condense a more refined electro-charge." Surprise flashed across Fiscal's fair face, as she prepared for another powered attack. Ounce, the raven in the sky, continuously bombarded the storm core with thunder bullets. Although the damage was minimal, it succeeded in drawing its attention, buying Fiscal time to prepare her attack. Nolan's dull blade definitely couldn't attack the target in the sky, so he could only use the adventurer's hunting bow and armor-piercing arrow to try something. Under the extraordinary characteristic of advanced stability, his arrows ignored the frenzy. His arrows, ignoring the whirlwind wrapped around the storm core, struck a bright spot on its dark green shell, creating a crack. This was because, in Nolan's eyes of judgment, there already existed a flaw in that spot, making it a weak point in the shell, easily breached by the armor-piercing arrow. However, his weapon was but a 2-star adventurer's bow. Though his extraordinary archery skills somewhat bridged the gap, Nolan's own power fell significantly short of the storm cores, making it difficult to inflict substantial damage. Fiscal watched Nolan hit the storm core with a non-elemental arrow without much surprise. After all, his archery skills had indeed reached a level difficult for others to match. She released another thunder element arrow she had been charging for a while. This time, she aimed for the gap in the deep green shell of the Eye of the Storm, seeking to strike directly at its heart for greater damage. Despite some instability, the thunder element arrow, breaking through the hurricane, finally hit its target. It inflicted some damage on the Eye of the Storm. As expected of a mere core of the wind, a few more arrows should do the trick. Fiscal raised her fair chin with a touch of arrogance, but before she could finish, Nolan interrupted her. He chuckled and suggested, Princess, based on the damage from that last arrow, it seems it won't be resolved with just a few more shots. How about you handle the element infusion, and I take the shots? Oh? Are you saying that you'll let this princess to imbue the elements for you, and use my bow? Fiscal raised her elegant eyebrows, her green eyes locking onto Nolan. She understood well enough, he wasn't talking about simply infusing his arrows with thunder elements as they had done against the water mage. No, this audacious fellow wanted to use her weapon too. Attendant, you wish too much. Weapons of 3 stars and above, once ascended to a certain level, will develop their own spirit. It's not as simple as just picking them up and using them. Fiscal's purple-black skirt fluttered with the buffeting winds, its ruffled hem dancing to reveal teasing glimpses of stockinged thighs peeking from beneath the leather garter straps. Spirit? Indeed, in the game, weapons enhanced to level 50 became significantly more beautiful, perhaps due to the emergence of this so-called spirit. Now that Nolan recalled, the mystic enhancement ores used in weapon enhancement as an ingot condensed from the memories of battles on the land. Absorbing those lingering impressions would naturally imbue weapons with a kind of soul or something. Nolan thought thoughtfully. And weapons with spirits, having grown accustomed to their owners, might not perform as well in others' hands, which made some sense. Speaking of which, if Fiscal's 4-star bow had been enhanced to level 50, coupled with her own considerable strength, it seemed unlikely that it would only slightly damage a level 40-something storm core. Some hidden factor must have empowered the monster beyond its apparent level for even her to struggle so. The reason eluded Nolan for now. Well, if that's the case, then I don't need to use your weapon, do I? He offered after briefly pondering. Not use a weapon? How could? Fiscal's curiosity sparked in her uncovered right eye, then a moment of realization crossed her face. You mean, together? That could work. She drew her bow once more, infusing her arrow with thunder elements and aiming at the storm core entangled with ounce, nodding, let's do this, my attendant. All right. Nolan positioned himself behind Fiscal, his right hand sliding under her fair armpit to slightly lift the black silk sleeve of her arm, grasping the pale fingers that held the bowstring. The soft touch and warm temperature passed through their skins. His left hand layered over Fiscal's hand, his chest pressed against her snow-white back, and her golden hair brushed against Nolan's face with the wind, making them appear as if embracing. In this manner, it was Fiscal who remained in contact with the weapon, yet it was Nolan, overlapping in stance with her, who truly exhibited masterful archery. After all, she was merely responsible for drawing the bow and infusing the arrow with elements. Nolan, with his golden eyes, focused on the storm core distracted by ounce in the sky, the bright spot indicating its weak point appearing. He felt that using the bow in this manner, his monster slayer specialty and the extraordinary properties of his archery could still be fully effective. Nolan gently held Fiscal's soft hand up and slightly adjusted the angle. Due to the closeness, his face brushed against Fiscal's for a moment, conveying a soft warmth from her golden strands. The moment her cheeks flushed with a hint of red and her gaze darted away. He coaxed Fiscal's fingers to release the bowstring. The arrow, charged with electro, vanished from sight instantaneously. Under its silent and shadowless extraordinary properties, it ignored the distances and the raging winds, piercing through the tough shell of the eye of the storm and embedding precisely into a vulnerability within its green spherical heart. Suddenly, electro erupted within the core, causing the storm core's nucleus to stutter in midair as if glitching. It seemed on the verge of falling. Again. Nolan turned his head for a moment, and Fiscal's snow-white ear buried in her golden hair accidentally touched his lips lightly. Hey! You there! Fiscal looked slightly annoyed, enduring the ticklish sensation in her ear without further complaint with a huff. The electro arrow was ready by the time she finished speaking. Nolan's lips curved into a slight smile. Letting go of Fiscal's soft, fair hand, the same spot on the storm core's body was struck by another arrow instantaneously. This time, it plummeted from the sky, crashing onto the grassy ground with a thud. Defeated a powerful enemy, Obtain 2053 Adventure Express. Oh? Obviously its level was a bit lower than a Hydro Abyss Mage, yet it yielded more Adventure EXP. If not unexpected, its strength might actually surpass that of the Hydro Mage. But due to its lower intellect, it couldn't fully manifest its capabilities. As a high-quality form produced by the accumulation of elemental ley lines, the eye of the storm would disperse back into light wind elements upon defeat. There should have been nothing left behind. Yet, at the spot where the eye of the storm's core dissipated, a red droplet-shaped crystal, glowing with a gloomy light, unexpectedly appeared. What is that? With the enemy defeated and no danger present, Eileen approached curiously. This princess seems to have sensed some kind of unsettling power. Fiskal swatted the hand still on hers away, sheathed her weapon, and stepped forward with Nolan and Ellen towards the red droplet crystal, her black-heeled boots crunching on the grass. No need to feel it, its appearance alone spelled trouble. Nolan commented inwardly. If he remembered correctly, this was a tear of the wind dragon, containing the power of the dragon Durin's toxic blood. Those with the vision would feel pain upon touching it due to elemental rejection in their bodies. For ordinary people, the game's lore didn't specify. Perhaps they would be corrupted by its ominous power. In any case, Nolan had no intention of finding out. Ah, don't touch it, it'll hurt. The voice that had traveled with the wind earlier rang out again. A green figure appeared above and to the left of Nolan and the others, drawing everyone's gaze. And who might you be? Fiskal, hands on her hips under the tight black outfit, asked with a hint of wariness. Regardless of how one looks at it, someone appearing out of the blue right after they've defeated an enemy, especially in the wilderness, is bound to raise suspicions. Holy crap, Venti! Nolan's heart skipped a beat in surprise, never expecting to encounter the Inmo Archon here. Unless, he was tracking the trail of the Storm Terror? After all, in the game, Mondstadt's Inmo Archon, Barbatos, wanders around disguised as a beautiful young man named Venti, presumably visiting wherever the wind takes him. Now that his kin has awakened, it wouldn't be surprising if he came looking for them. Just a passing bard, you see. After all, to excel in this profession, one must master the art of appearing just at the right moment where a story unfolds, don't you think? The young man with a hat, dressed in green and twin-braided tresses, said with a light chuckle. That does make some sense. Nolan, knowing the nature of the Inmo Archon to be free-spirited and amiable, didn't show fear or excessive reverence upon realizing he was in the presence of a god. Right, right. The green-clad, braided youth was visibly pleased to have his view acknowledged. Humph, so, do you have business with us? Fiskal said, somewhat impolitely. Her purple-black dress fluttered in the breeze as she lightly touched her black-stockinged legs. Ah, well, as a bard, I might not know much, but I do have some insight. I came to warn you about this crimson droplet crystal. It's quite dangerous, so it's best to handle it with care, the braided youth cheerfully explained. Ah, so we've been busy for nothing. Ellen expressed a slight disappointment, having thought they might find treasure here. How about I trade something for it? I'll trade it for the big treasure chest that was originally here. After all, it's of no use to you, but I can take care of it, Venti suggested, patting the green vision at his waist, then placing a lavish-looking large treasure chest on the grass before them. Luxurious treasure chest! Eileen exclaimed, slightly surprised. According to her father, who had been an adventurer, luxurious treasure chests were extremely rare finds. So, what do you say? Want to trade? Venti asked with a smile. I always feel like there's something fishy about you, Fiskal remarked, shifting her stance. Her hands, covered in black sheer sleeves, crossed over her lower abdomen, gently emphasizing her soft chest. How could that be? I'm so adorable, hee hee. Venti playfully stuck out his tongue. For a moment, the three, along with the night raven ounce, were rendered speechless. Eventually, after discussing it among themselves, Nolan and the others decided to trade with Venti. After all, the purpose of the crimson droplet crystal remained a mystery to them. Thank you. Should the chance arise, I'll definitely turn your adventures into poetry and spread it throughout all of Monstadt. By then, you'll be known as outstanding adventurers in everyone's eyes. With those words, Venti harnessed the wind element, drawing the crimson droplet crystal into his hand. Leaving behind the luxurious treasure chest with a smile, he waved goodbye and departed. Nolan and the others paid no attention to this fellow, but instead cast all their eyes on the magnificent treasure chest. Although there were many twists and turns, the treasure of the Windmill Chrysanthemum Garden had finally arrived. The only regret was that there was not a single Windmill Chrysanthemum in the promised Windmill Chrysanthemum Garden. This luxurious treasure chest, such a rare item. Who knows when we'll encounter another? Let's open it together. Nolan said with slight anticipation. Ellen kept nodding her head. Fiskal and Night Raven Ounce, of course, both had no opinion, and then each of them placed a hand on the lid of the magnificent treasure chest. With a slight push, it was slowly pushed open. Only to slam it shut again in unison, exchanging bewildered looks. Are we seeing things? Ellen said with dazed eyes and some uncertainty. I think not. Nolan was sure of it. Apart from a single piece of paper, the chest was empty. That green-clad rascal, to think he'd deceive a princess. Fiscal's fair face showed a flash of anger. Night Raven Ounce, retracting his night wings, perched atop the chest lid, sighed. He seemed so friendly, yet he pulled such a stunt. Let's see what his note says. Chapter 112, Swordsmanship Fusion. Oops, my dear friends, I must apologize. I discovered this treasure chest here months ago, and I've already taken all the treasures inside to exchange for some good wine, which I've enjoyed to the last drop. So, I suppose I owe you all this one. I'm sure you'll forgive me, right? Your best buddy, the renowned bard, Venti. Eileen held the note left in the empty treasure chest, reading every word aloud. What best buddy? And adding the best? We've only just met, what a despicable fellow. Fiscal clenched her fists, turning her gaze away with a proud huff. Nolan's gaze lingered on the leather straps connecting the over-the-knee black stockings to the soft, snow-white thighs, lost in thought. Venti was a carefree and Mo Archon after all, and it didn't seem like much of a surprise that he'd spent all his money because he'd bought alcohol. Never mind. If he's truly a bard who loves his wine, we'll catch him at the tavern when the opportunity arises. Surely, we can corner him there. Having been cheated all the way, Nolan could only say somewhat helplessly. When the time comes, this princess demands double recompense. As if she thought of something interesting, the corner of her mouth curved up a little bit and continued, or perhaps we'll tie him to a carriage and parade him through the streets. Humph. A parade? A public shaming? If you can pull that off, Teyvat's other archons might just salute you as the great condemning princess. Nolan couldn't help but chuckle inwardly at the thought. We should return home. Mom and Dad must be worried after we stayed out all night, Ellen reminded with a soft sigh. Indeed, Miss Ellen makes a valid point, nodded Ounce the Night Raven, flapping his night wings. Then let's go. After all, you're our employer, so I hope we can make it back before nightfall. Nolan said with a smile. Oh, come on, Nolan. Are you trying to remind me not to forget to pay you for the commission? Ellen teased with a smirk. Ahem, of course not. Nolan averted his gaze, looked up at the brilliant sunlight, and felt the warm breeze blowing from Cape Lookout, and took a step to walk in front of the group. After these 2 days of adventure, his Adventure EXP had accumulated to over 7,900, allowing him to enhance his strength once again. Needless to say, the most important thing is his level. After all, this is the foundation of everything, and then Favonius Swordsmanship, Fundamentals is almost reaching its maximum level, so it's time to level up it as well. Adventure EXP, 4,900. Level, LV.24, 0/2,400. Level, LV.26, 0/2,600. Familiar warmth surged, propelling his body to evolve comprehensively, his spirit soaring, and strength continuously welling up. The next moment, his body instinctively assumed control, without any feeling of discomfort. Next is the already level 6 Favonius Swordsmanship, Fundamentals. With just over 3,000 experience points left, it's just enough to level up it to the maximum level. Adventure EXP -3,000. Favonius Swordsmanship, Fundamentals LV.6, 0/600. Favonius Swordsmanship, Fundamentals LV.10, Boundary of Wind Still/Fusion available. Knowledge and experience about the Favonius Swordsmanship appeared in his mind, exactly as if he had been practicing for years, again without a hint of rustiness. With swordsmanship at its max level, his insights and horizons in this area had reached a corresponding height. Favonius Swordsmanship, Fundamentals, as the foundational swordsmanship of the Knights of Favonius, after mastering it to the limit, also gave rise to some interesting extraordinary traits. It was called Boundary of Wind Still. The specific meaning was that because he had mastered the foundational swordsmanship so well, it's difficult for any external interference to affect his state of mind. When wielding the sword, his state of mind could vaguely sense the flow of the wind, and he could even use swordsmanship to make it pause slightly. This is a mental state that allows Nolan to calmly deal with any dangerous situation in battle. Although it may not seem to have an attack bonus, it greatly enhances his strength. Next, Nolan chose to fuse the 2 max-level swordsmanship skills. The font on the character panel twisted for a moment, like 2 different bottles of ink slowly blending together. And thus, a new swordsmanship skill was born. Favonius Royal Swordsmanship LV.10, Flickering Candlelight, Boundary of Wind Still. The fusion of swordsmanship skills is not just the combination of two different swordsmanship techniques, it's a more profound and powerful skill evolved from the previous swordsmanship skills. Although it's not very obvious now, if he continues to merge further, even the extraordinary traits within it will merge into a more advanced extraordinary power, which may not necessarily be inferior to elemental power. Of course, it would be even better if used in conjunction with elemental power. Nolan couldn't help but feel slightly happy as he continued to gaze at the significantly changed character panel. Name, Nolan Walker. Level, LV.26, 0/2600. Race, Human. Title, None. Innate talent, Entangling Affection. Skills, Favonius Hunter's Archery LV.10, Advanced Stability, Silent and Shadowless, Favonius Royal Swordsmanship LV.10, Flickering Candlelight, Boundary of Wind Still, Stealth Assassination LV.4, 0/400, Martial Arts LV.2, 0/200, Sin Purging Arrow LV.1, 1/100. Specialties, Descender Maiden Savior Monster Slayer Abundant Life. Adventure EXP, 6. The hard-earned Adventure EXP had once again bottomed out, but with the increasing level, the efficiency of gaining Adventure EXP would also increase as he could defeat more powerful enemies. This was inevitable, and Nolan didn't worry too much about it. On the way back to Monstadt City, everyone distributed the loot. First of all, the hydro-elemental ores, which, according to Ounce, were worth around 30,000 mora each. Originally, they were going to split it evenly among the three, but Ellen insisted that since she was just here for the experience and relied on everyone to fend off monsters, she couldn't accept it. She had already taken the commission fee from the previous gathering team's mission, so she felt guilty taking something so valuable. Seeing her like this, Nolan and Fiskal could understand, but they still gave her some of the less valuable slime condensates. After all, it was the enemy she defeated herself, so it was good to keep a souvenir. Fiskal stated that the hydro-elemental ores were of no use to her, and Nolan seemed to want to use them to make elemental arrows, so they generously gave them to him. After getting the 3 ores worth 90,000 mora, the others, like crystal ores and 2 1-star artifacts, were all given to her. In this way, everyone received items of considerable value. The setting sun cast a yellowish light on the majestic city walls. Nolan and his companions finally returned to Monstadt City before the sunset. During this process, Nolan also casually returned the swordsmanship manual Rhine one-handed sword technique that he had borrowed from the library. Earlier, in the cave, this book was in his backpack and had been cushioned against the wall. Fortunately, it was quite thick and could withstand the impact, so it wasn't completely damaged, and the content inside could still be read. However, the cover was scratched, and now he didn't know how to explain it to Miss Lisa when he returned the book in a few days. Is there any hope for my delusion? Nolan's heart fell to the bottom of the despairing thought. Chapter 113, Wind Glider. Goodbye, everyone, I'll head back first. Ellen smiled and waved before jogging away. Ounce, with the night-colored wings, stirred a faint airflow, and remarked as his mistress's dress fluttered, "All right, until next time, Miss Ellen. I didn't sleep well in the cave last night, so this princess is heading back too." Fiskal turned her face slightly, her golden locks slipping through her fingers as she stifled a yawn, appearing somewhat fatigued. With that, Fiskal gracefully walked away, her legs clad in asymmetric black stockings accentuating her soft curves, followed by Ounce. Then, Nolan, carrying 3 pieces of water elemental ore, arrived near the blacksmith's shop by the city gate. "Hello, Mr. Wagner." Nolan greeted the burly man hammering iron with a smile. "Oh, it's you, lad. Used up those arrows already?" Wagner finished his last strike, setting the hammer aside. "Not quite. Last time, you said you ran out of pyro-elemental ore for forging fire-imbued arrows, so this time I brought a few water-elemental ones. Can you make similar arrows with them?" Nolan presented the 3 azure-colored ores to Wagner. "It seems you had a good haul today, kid. With the costs, I'll have to sell over a dozen dull blade to earn those ores from you." Wagner's large hand picked up one of the ores, inspecting its quality closely. Examining the aquamarine ore back and forth, he continued, rubbing his chin, "Very good. Just holding it, you can feel it attracting the surrounding hydro elements. These are enough to forge a decent 3-star one-handed sword as auxiliary materials. Using them all for arrows would be a bit wasteful. After all, arrows were ultimately disposable consumables. A 3-star one-handed sword, hey. Nolan pondered. As a weapon, it couldn't be entirely made from water elemental ore due to insufficient hardness and toughness. Typically, other materials like steel and crystal ore would be used as the primary materials. Especially crystal ore, one of the finest materials for forging high-star weapons, was essential. Therefore, weapons forged from multiple materials like this would be challenging to trigger elemental power through friction like fire-imbued arrows did. As a long-term usable one-handed sword, it wouldn't be crafted as a disposable consumable like fire-imbued arrows just for temporary elemental attacks. If the ore could automatically restore the consumed elemental power, that would be another story. Forget it, Mr. Wagner, I have a reinforced dull blade for now. What I'm mainly lacking is means for elemental attacks. Nolan thought for a moment and decided he still wanted elemental arrows. Haha, alright. However, there's a significant difference between making hydro-elemental arrows and fire-imbued arrows. I can't say exactly how many arrows we can make, or even if we can successfully make them. Come back in a few days to check. Compared to elemental arrows, Wagner preferred crafting 3-star weapons. After all, not only did they better showcase the blacksmith's skills, they also brought in more profit. Nolan nodded and left the blacksmith's shop, and walked up the steps onto the street. Passing by the Good Hunter restaurant, he was about to grab a bite to eat when he noticed several familiar figures near the fountain in the square. There was Paimon, wearing a golden crown and a white outfit, Lumen in a backless white dress, and Amber with her deep brown hair. Her red rabbit ear hair knot swayed gently in the breeze, and a smile appeared on her fair face as she was chatting with the two of them. Since all three were friends that Nolan knew, he put aside his thoughts of wanting to eat and walked over in preparation to say hello. Then before he could even get completely close, Nolan was spotted by the sharp Scout Knight. Hey? Nolan. Amber pressed her fingertips against her soft belly, and continued to ask in a standing position with her arms crossed, did you just come back from an adventure? Why do you look like this? Nolan's clothes were torn everywhere, indeed looking a bit disheveled. Haha, just a bit unlucky, I met a passing wind dragon and got knocked by the gust it stirred up. Nolan shrugged indifferently. So Amber, you know this guy too? Paimon, with her hands behind her back, expressed slight surprise with her starry eyes. We had a meal together in the wilderness. Does that mean you've eaten together? The dim sunlight illuminated Amber's smiling face. Yeah. Lumen nodded, speaking with few words. By the way, what are you all doing here? While Nolan had a vague sense of the plot, he didn't remember every detail, hence his curious question. He only had a fuzzy impression that Lumen and Paimon met Amber on the way to Monstadt, and shortly after being brought into the city, they encountered a wind dragon causing a disaster. Wait a minute. It couldn't be happening at this moment, could it? Nolan's heart skipped a beat, feeling more and more likely as he thought about it. Amber rested her chin on her fair fingers, pondering for a moment before explaining. While on a mission to clear out the hilly churl camp outside the city at noon, I happened to encounter the traveler Lumen and her companion, cute Paimon. Since there have been recent sightings of dragons around the city, I thought to escort them into the city while completing my mission. But unexpectedly, the traveler's strength was quite impressive, and it actually made my mission much easier. So, as a token of gratitude, I thought to give the traveler a small gift. A small gift? Nolan seemed to recall something. This gift should be the wind gliders. Hehe, I'm also curious about what Amber's gift is. Could it be something delicious? Paimon's eyes seemed to sparkle with golden light, showing great anticipation. Lumen hugged her breasts, slightly lifting and showing the soft curves between her snow-white skin, and looked at her with a speechless expression on her face. Hehe, let's go to a higher place first, and then I'll tell you. Amber chuckled mysteriously, then looked at the young adventurer beside her and said, by the way, Nolan, why don't you come along too? You'll get a gift too. Oh, I have one too. Nolan was slightly surprised. That's right. Anyway, just follow me for now. Nolan followed Amber and the girls and climbed up to a high position on the street above the fountain square, and then Amber pulled out two pairs of wing-like objects from her vision, one in each hand. Ta-da! The promised gift is wind gliders. Wind gliders? Lumen showed a surprised expression. Uh-huh. Whether it's for a scout knight or an adventurer, the wind gliders are essential equipment, allowing us to move through the air with ease. Ember's white high-heeled knee-high boots stepped on the stone ground, her snow-white thighs emitting a delicate golden light under the setting sun. Chapter 114, The Incoming Windstorm. Indeed, it was the wind gliders, Nolan hadn't remembered wrong. Paimon knows about these too. With these wind gliders, you can fly in the sky just like me. Paimon exclaimed, clenching her tiny fists with excitement. You won't be able to do it as skillfully as Paimon here, and you'll need to glide down from a high place. Both of you, give them a try and see how they perform. Amber grinned, flashing her white teeth, and handed a wind glider to both Nolan and Lumen. No pain, no gain. Is it really okay to give me gifts like this? Nolan said somewhat politely. Although he knew that wind gliders weren't particularly valuable items. Ordinary ones sold in stores were only around 20 to 30,000 mora, while the more expensive ones were around 50 to 60,000 mora, affordable even for the average Monstadt citizen. He had actually wanted to buy one a while ago. It's just that due to consecutive adventures, he had been delayed. After all, just getting a wind glider didn't mean he could use it right away. Although it wasn't difficult to operate, it was like learning to ride a bike. It would take some time to learn how to maintain balance after taking off, especially without anyone to guide him. Without someone to guide him, he would inevitably fall a few times, and falling while using the wind glider, even if not flying high, would probably leave him with sprains and fractures for half a day. Amber was warm-hearted and generous, so there was nothing wrong with giving a friend a wind glider. But that's how interpersonal relationships worked. Nolan couldn't just accept Amber's gift as a matter of course just because they were friends. After all, he hadn't helped her clean up the hilly churl camp like Lumen had just now. If Nolan really wanted to accept it in his heart, he still had to be polite on the surface. Otherwise, in the long run, if he only knew how to ask for things from friends without giving back, he might easily become disliked. To avoid lowering the hard-earned affection, Nolan felt it was better to be a bit courteous in dealing with people. After all, there was a maximum limit to affection. As long as he wasn't disliked, with more time spent together, whether it was through major or minor events in daily life, there would eventually come a time when he would gain the ability of the Seat of Destiny, Archon Seat. It's okay. Didn't we meet outside before, collecting materials in the wild with you and Sucrose? At that time, I noticed that you hadn't learned how to use the wind glider yet. Now, let Amber, your teacher, give you a little guidance. Amber patted her night uniform, revealing some soft white skin on her chest, and said confidently. I see. Since that's the case, then I'll rely on you, Amber. Nolan lightly nodded and said. He, we're counting on you too. Paimon, with the golden crown floating above his head, said, while Lumen also nodded. All right, let me first teach you the correct way to equip the wind gliders. Nolan and Lumen, under Amber's guidance, easily equipped the wind glider, then they were pushed to the edge of the street. Hey? Amber, is this what you meant by guidance? Lumen's amber-colored pupils looked nervously at the ground below. It's like when a baby bird learns to fly for the first time. Its mother pushes it off, and what it needs most is courage. Plus, from this height, you won't get hurt even if you fall. Amber's knots in her red rabbit ears bobbed slightly as she touched the goggles hanging around her neck. I didn't expect you to think like that. What do you mean won't get hurt? That must hurt a lot, Amber, are you a demon or something? Nolan estimated that the ground was at least 2 to 3 meters below where he was standing. Hehe, saying bad things about me, you're the first one. Amber came up behind Nolan and gave him a gentle push on the back. Nolan's entire body became a bit unstable, and then he suddenly stepped into nothingness. Just when he thought he was about to plummet, a force from behind lifted him slightly and he descended slowly. This surprised Nolan, who exclaimed, so this is what flying feels like. It's really something. He had descended about 2 meters by now, feeling like he could grasp the essence of controlling the wind glider a bit better. Just as he was about to turn back to thank Amber, the wind glider tilted too much, throwing his body off balance. Nolan flipped over and fell flat on his back with a thud. The pain from the abrasions he had just healed started to return to his back, and he looked up at the 3 people on the railing above the street, enduring their laughter with a helpless expression. Amber has developed good feelings towards you, obtained 90 affection points. Current affection level, LV4, 50/400. Lumen has developed good feelings towards you, obtained 75 affection points. Current affection level, LV2, 35/200. Paimon has developed good feelings towards you, obtain 60 affection points. Current affection level, LV2, 50/200. The character panel popped up with several affection points notifications, and Nolan couldn't help but feel exasperated. Because of his embarrassing situation, they teased him, finding him amusing, and the resulting increase in affection left him feeling oddly frustrated. Lumen propped herself up with her hands on her knees, leaning slightly forward. Along the elegant lines of her thighs, visible beneath her white knee-high boots, one could catch glimpses of her snow-white skin and shorts. She cleared her throat, suppressing her smile, and asked, "Hey, Nolan, are you okay?" "Of course not." Nolan got up, rubbed his back, and shook his head. "Well then, the next one is the traveler," Amber said, patting Lumen's shoulder with her gloved right hand, smiling. In no time, the two of them became familiar with using the wind glider, especially Lumen, who could fly before she lost her power. After equipping the wind glider, she instantly grasped it at lightning speed. Seeing that everyone was getting familiar with the wind glider, Amber led Nolan and Lumen from this elevated position on a long glide down to the fountain square below. "Very good, you all truly live up to." Just as Amber was about to praise the two of them, a gust of wind blew, causing her dark brown hair draped over her back to fly forward, covering her face. Lumen and Paimon raised their hands to shield themselves from the swirling dust. The hem of her backless dress swayed violently, revealing her snow-white thighs slightly. Nolan looked up at the rapidly gathering dark clouds in the sky, obscuring the sun that was about to set. Then the wind grew stronger, instantly lifting and tossing away some unstable sheds within Monstadt city. The citizens of Monstadt city walking on the streets panicked, quickly seeking shelter. Sure enough, the dragon calamity was approaching. Wow, such a strong wind! Paimon, being lighter in weight and still floating in midair without any points of contact, could only grab onto the white ribbon on Lumen's dress for support. As Lumen struggled to keep her eyes open against the wind, she suddenly saw a massive mythical creature roaring angrily in the sky above the city gate. "Traveler, look, it's the giant dragon we encountered in the forest before." Chapter 115, The Power to Defeat a Dragon. In Monstadt, a hurricane rages. The once clean and tidy streets are now in chaos, with all sorts of things that can be blown away dancing in the wind. Nolan's eyes gradually turned golden as he looked up at the wind dragon in the sky. Level. Neither the level nor weaknesses are visible. It seems that the Storm Terror's level already exceeds the combined total of Nolan and Fiscal. Why is it attacking Monstadt? Lumen, wearing white sleeves, held up a blunted sword she had just taken out, her fair face showing a solemn expression. It's obvious. She has already encountered the one of the 7 Archons statue in Monstadt and gained the power of an Mo element. So, unsurprisingly, she also has the ability to collect things with elemental power similar to the vision. Lumen without the vision was supposed to use the body as a carrier. After all, she was once a powerful being who could travel through different worlds. Even though she lost her power, she hasn't lost the knowledge in her mind. After being able to use the power of wind element, she didn't need to learn the techniques of using elemental power from scratch like other newly acquired vision wielders. With her knowledge and experience, her strength grew rapidly, or rather, she was not slow to recover to her former level. Nolan glanced at her with his golden eye of judgment, which didn't fail this time. Lumen now has the strength of level 40, much stronger than him. But in the game storyline, Lumen is capable of repelling the wind dragon. Can she do it with her current strength? Nolan thought with a bit of uncertainty. Then he glanced at Paimon, who was holding onto the ribbon of Lumen's dress to prevent herself from being blown away. He found that she was only at level 2, just like an ordinary person. It seems that regardless of her mysterious background, she is not strong in her current state. Be careful, the wind dragon is about to attack. In order not to be affected by the hurricane, Amber put on the goggles hanging around her neck onto her eyes. At this moment, she clearly saw the storm terror opening its ferocious mouth, continuously gathering wind elements within it, as if it was about to spew out its terrifying dragon's breath. Such a terrifying attack! If it hits Monstadt city, will it even create a breach in the city walls? Nolan couldn't help but nervously take a step back, while holding his adventurer's hunter bow in his hand. It seems that this is the only way to feel a bit safer. Traveler, stop it quickly. We are too close to its attack range, and will be affected by it. Won't our journey end here just as it's begun? Wah! Paymon's voice was tense with a faint hint of crying. It's flying too high. Lumen condensed a vortex in her hand, but then reluctantly dispersed it with a five-fingered grip. She couldn't attack from such a far distance for the time being. Nolan frowned slightly upon hearing Paymon's words. It seems that running away now is already too late. The wind dragon was high in the air, and there were only 2 archers on the scene who could hit it. Right at this moment, Amber pulled her long, messy brown hair to the back of her head and infused the arrow with fierce fire elemental power. With a release of the bowstring, the arrow, like a crimson meteor, streaked through the gloomy sky, moving against the wind, crashed into the wind dragon's gathering dragon breath, and was easily torn apart and dissipated by the raging wind. Amber is much weaker than the storm terror, and a frontal attack is unlikely to have much impact on it. Although the wind dragon's strength exceeds the effective range of the golden eye of judgment, and its weaknesses cannot be seen. But Nolan, with his foresight, naturally knows that its weakness lies in the influence of the poison blood power within its body, and the poisonous spines that grow on its back. Attacking there should surely cause it harm. Amber, can you help attach some elemental power? Nolan said to the girl with snow-white thighs exposed by her over-the-knee boots. As for why he didn't ask Lumen to help, it was naturally because the wind dragon had a very, very high resistance to the wind element and couldn't do much damage at all. Even the lowest level elemental beings like slimes were immune to the corresponding elemental damage, and as a rare elemental dragon, it was naturally not far off. After all, one of the basic elements that make up this elemental life form is wind. When wind elements hit the wind dragon, it's like drops of water merging into the ocean. How could it affect itself? At most, it would just stir up some waves. The reason wind elemental damage is effective against it in the game storyline is that it's hitting the poisonous spines on its back, which are not part of the wind dragon itself. Of course, no problem. Amber's movements were swift, rushing in less than a second to attach the fire elemental for Nolan before the wind dragon released its dragon's breath. The next moment, the armor-piercing arrow with fire elemental attached, without a trajectory, without any signs, silently crossed a distance of tens of meters and accurately pinned itself onto the poisonous spine on the wind dragon's back, radiating with gloomy light. The intense pain caused the wind dragon's almost completed dragon breath to dissipate unstably. Its angry gaze stared at the few ants on the ground. Due to the influence of the poisonous blood, the wind dragon's reason has long been clouded. It completely gave up its airspace advantage and swiped down at Nolan and the others with its claws. Quickly, get out of the way. Lumen pulled the scarf around Paymon's neck, who was stunned, and with a powerful push from her feet, she leaped a distance away. The gigantic dragon claw slammed onto the fountain in the square, causing bricks and stones to fly in all directions for a moment. Nolan and Amber also quickly jumped to the side, using their hands to shield themselves from the flying dust and fragments of the fountain. He hadn't expected the storm terror to directly charge down and cause damage to Monstadt with brute force, but fortunately, it still hadn't managed to spew out its dragon breath. Otherwise, the damage to Monstadt city would have been even greater. Seizing the opportunity as the wind dragon approached the ground, Lumen took 2 steps, leaped onto the wind dragon's head, and stabbed downwards with her dull blade. The sword tip sank in about 3 inches, but only caused a slight cut. However, unexpectedly, Lumen's strike seemed to inflict even greater pain on it than when Nolan attacked the poisonous spines. It frantically shook its head, trying to throw Lumen off. Bang! The wind dragon crashed into a nearby building, and a corner of the 2-story structure instantly collapsed. Lumen also had an intimate encounter with the outer wall of the 2nd floor of the building and was sent flying. Ah, traveler! Paymon watched Lumen about to fall to the ground, anxiously wanting to fly up and catch her. But with Paymon's strength, she would most likely just end up injuring herself. Nolan pulled her back, quickly taking 2 steps forward to catch Lumen in her arms in a princess carry. His left hand passed through her back, grabbing onto her snow-white shoulder, while his right hand was slightly pressed against her soft thighs and calves clad in white over-the-knee boots. Before he could even feel a trace of warmth, the tremendous force from the girl's body impact caused Nolan to stagger back 2 steps, and he ended up sitting on the ground with his hands supporting himself. Lumen's buttocks were slightly tilted, sitting on Nolan's lower abdomen, with one hand pressing on his knees to support herself. "Sorry, are you okay?" She shook her head, then quickly reached out to Nolan and asked. "I'm fine, just almost vomited up the pork I had yesterday." Nolan held the girl's fair hand as he was pulled up, indicating that he was all right. At this moment, the wind dragon didn't continue to pay attention to everyone. It quickly ascended into the sky and flew towards the city gates. This relieved everyone. Although the process was difficult, Monstadt city was temporarily safe, and Lumen's final blow seemed to have had a significant effect. Nolan speculated that it should be related to her ability to purify the red droplet-shaped crystals. After all, that thing also contained the power of the poisonous blood in the wind dragon's body. Presumably, it was Lumen's purifying power that scared it away just now. End of chapter. Chapter 116, Grandmaster Jean's Request. Whatever I ate yesterday has long been digested, really. Lumen playfully covered her mouth with a loosely clenched fist, a smile blooming on her fair face as she lightly retorted. Lumen has developed good feelings towards you, obtained 210 affection points. Current affection level, LV.3, 45/300. She slightly raised her affection towards Nolan, who caught her. Yet, if you're going to throw up it's only going to come out of your ass. Paimon joked with less concern as he floated over to Lumen, turning left and right to check that she hadn't suffered much damage. Ugh! All three cast speechless glances at her, dumbfounded by the indescribable joke Paimon had just cracked. Hey! Why are you all looking at me like that? Isn't what I said a fact? Ugh, how infuriating! Paimon crossed her arms, huffed, closed her eyes, and turned away, putting on an I am angry look. Haha, Paimon, don't be angry, I'll treat you to a big meal later. Nolan said with a smile. As everyone knows, Paimon getting mad at someone could generally be solved with food. If that didn't work, it surely meant she hadn't eaten enough yet. Really? Paimon immediately turned back and looked at Nolan with a very expectant gaze. Of course, it's... Before Nolan could finish his words, he saw Cavalry Captain Kaya, whom they had met once before, rushing over with a team of Knights of Favonius dressed in silver and white armor. Ah, my friends, as soon as I learned of the attack on Monstadt, I immediately led my men here. Unfortunately, we were a bit late and just in time to see your battle concluding. It was truly astonishing. Kaya spread his hands, his slightly dark face framed by an eye patch showing a look of surprise, then he specifically turned to Lumen. Especially you, a stranger I've never seen before, able to fend off a dragon with a single strike. Are you a guest, or perhaps a new storm? At this moment, Kaya pondered, a slight sharpness in her gaze. Lumen, with her hand resting against her soft waist, met his gaze with calm, amber eyes. Hey, what do you mean by that? Of course, we come in peace. Didn't you see we helped you drive away the dragon? Paimon said, somewhat displeased. Haha, my apologies, I accidentally spoke my thoughts out loud. Kaya tried to smooth things over. The reason he asked was naturally because, as a Knight of Favonius, it was his duty to eliminate potential dangers to Monstadt. Regardless of the reason, being able to repel the Wind Dragon meant their unknown and powerful force was only different from the Wind Dragon in that it hadn't acted against Monstadt. Alright, Kaya, the traveler and her companions are not enemies. Amber took off her goggles and hung them around her neck, the weight pressing slightly against the soft curve of her chest, creating a gentle indent. She explained the circumstances of their meeting to Kaya. She recounted the encounter with Lumen and Paimon, including their quest to find her lost brother. I see, welcome to Monstadt, although it's at such a bad time, and it's a good thing that you guys repelled the Wind Dragon just now, otherwise it's really hard to imagine how much damage it would have caused to Monstadt city. I'd like to express my gratitude to you guys first on behalf of the knights here. Kaya said with a smile as if he understood, and then turned his gaze to Nolan. Oh, and you, young adventurer, I almost forgot about you. You must have been a great help as well. Mr. Kaya, you're too kind. How could I have possibly helped? It was all thanks to Miss Lumen. Although Nolan's arrow didn't cause much damage, but it also lured the Wind Dragon down. Of course, there was some assistance provided, but he couldn't admit it himself, that would seem too immodest. Besides, without Lumen, things might have turned out differently. You scoundrel! Lumen planted her hands on her hips, pushing out her chest beneath the backless dress in exasperated disapproval of Nolan. Did she seem the type to covet empty praises? By the way, Kaya, that Wind Dragon has already started attacking the city's interior. We have to quickly go back and report to Acting Grandmaster Jean so that everyone can prepare to deal with it. Ember's deep brown hair gently brushed against her nose as she spoke urgently, her fair face showing a worried expression. Okay, the actions you took to defend Monstadt were witnessed by the citizens. It wouldn't be right not to invite you to be received by the knights. I'm sure the acting Grandmaster will want to thank you properly. Kaya raised his hand with a smile. Humph, that's more like it. Hearing Kaya's words, Paimon nodded in satisfaction with her hands on her hips. If Nolan remembered correctly, it seemed that because of the Abyss Order's instructions, monsters like hilly churls that usually roamed the wilderness had begun to act around the city. This had a significant impact on Monstadt, requiring the Knights of Favonius to clear them out. Moreover, although the Wind Dragon had left, the havoc it caused had not ended, requiring the Knights of Favonius to protect the citizens of Monstadt together. That's all for now. Various reasons had led to a severe shortage of manpower in the Knights of Favonius. So when Kaya mentioned inviting them to the Knights' headquarters to be properly thanked, it was also a hint that they might need temporary assistance. After all, resolving the crisis brought by the Wind Dragon was very urgent. Lumen and Nolan both possessed considerable strength, making them perfect candidates. Although he knew all this, Nolan didn't reveal it. After all, as long as he wasn't facing the Wind Dragon directly, his safety could still be ensured with his strength. Participating in such a significant event, he knew it was inevitable to gain some special benefits afterwards, and Nolan didn't want to miss out. As Amber's deep brown hair cascaded along her back's gentle curves, Nolan followed along to the headquarters of the Knights of Favonius. Upon arrival, they found that the Knights of Favonius who were stationed there had been dispatched elsewhere for other tasks. The doors of the hall were wide open, and the group headed towards the office of the acting Grandmaster. With her golden hair tied into a single ponytail, the acting Grandmaster, sitting on the chair behind the desk, looked neat and efficient. She was currently in conversation with Lisa, who wore a deep blue slim robe and a pointed witch hat. Acting Grandmaster, Lisa, have you heard? The Wind Dragon. As soon as Amber stepped in, she was eager to report the dragon's attack on the city. Hee, Amber, you shouldn't be so impatient. Lisa, her legs clad in black lace-trimmed thigh-high stockings, stepped forward and pressed her index finger against Amber's soft lips. Acting Grandmaster, I've brought the hero who repelled the Wind Dragon to you. Let me explain what happened. Kaya smiled on his dusky face and recounted the recent events. I see. Welcome to Monstadt, travelers who came with the wind. The acting Grandmaster briefly introduced herself and Lisa to Lumen and Paimon, then paused for a moment before continuing. Travelers, and Mr. Adventurer, I met a few days ago, could I trouble you with something? End of chapter. Chapter 117, Separating Paths. Is it about the Wind Dragon? Paimon, wearing a golden crown on her head, asked with her hands behind her back, her starry eyes filled with curiosity. That's right. Acting Grandmaster Jean stood up from her chair, her white form-fitting pants revealing the clear contours and imprints of her knees. She walked out in matching white boots and continued, thanks to Lisa's magical reconnaissance, we've found the source of the hurricane enveloping Monstadt. The source of power. Lumen crossed her arms, allowing her not-so-plump chest to rest on them, and looked down at the golden patterns on Jean's abdomen, just like those of Lisa and Amber beside her, with a hint of confusion. Isn't the storm caused by the Wind Dragon? How can there be another source of power? Kaya leaned against the corner of a square table nearby and explained, you probably wouldn't know since you're not from Monstadt, but the Wind Dragon known as Stromterror used to be one of the four winds, the Dragon of the East, the Inmo Archon's attendant and friend. It battled with a dragon hundreds of years ago and was injured, causing it to slumber. Just recently awakened, its power is but a shadow of its former self, and it seems to still have lingering injuries. It's quite difficult for it to summon such a massive hurricane enveloping Monstadt. Lisa, wearing a pointed witch hat, ran her hand through her chestnut-colored hair and nodded in agreement. Kaya is right. The Wind Dragon is utilizing the residual power of the abandoned Four Winds temples to carry out its actions. I see. Nolan showed a moment of realization, this was something he already knew. Traveler, with Monstadt in such chaos, it seems the Knights of Favonius won't be able to spare any effort to help us find your brother. How about we lend a hand? Paimon said, rubbing her head in distress. Well, we can't burden the Knights alone. Lumen felt that Paimon made a valid point. If they had the ability, it wouldn't hurt to help out a bit. Oh, such kind-hearted children. How adorable, Lisa said with a lazy, elegant smile on her fair face. Calling Lumen a child? Miss Lisa, her real age could probably make her your ancestor. Nolan couldn't help but silently complain in his heart. It's mainly because Eula is still out on a mission, otherwise our manpower wouldn't have to be so strained, alas. Amber said, sighing slightly as she lowered her hands. All right, that's great. Now that everyone has agreed, let's decide on a battle plan. Kaya nodded enthusiastically. Ahem, Mr. Kaya, you seem to have overlooked me. Isn't that a bit inappropriate? Nolan coughed lightly, reminding him. Although he had no intention of refusing, Kaya shouldn't decide without asking for his opinion. Oh, is the adventurer about to refuse? Kaya looked at him somewhat surprised, then smirked. Oh, by the way, when you walked over just now, I noticed something familiar in your tattered backpack. Hold on a second. Nolan hadn't expected Kaya, this asshole, to discover the swordsmanship manual with its accidentally damaged cover in his backpack and try to use it to threaten him. His temperament was truly despicable. He wasn't quite ready to face Lisa yet, so he said without pressing the matter further, I've received a lot of care from everyone in the Knights of Favonius, so I certainly won't refuse. That's good then. On behalf of the Knights, we thank you. Acting Grandmaster Jean nodded slightly, her golden ponytail swaying lightly in acknowledgement. Jean has developed good feelings towards you, obtained 150 affection points. Current affection level, LV.3, 30/300. Looking at the affection prompt that popped up on the character panel, Nolan smiled and said. Since the Wind Dragon is using the power of the abandoned Four Winds temples, our goal is to head to those temples and find a way to sever their connection, right? You're quite sharp, indeed, acting Grandmaster Jean said, her cape casting a shadow over her legs covered by boots as she stood in the light. Our goal is to target the other 3 temples besides the Dragon of the East Wind Temple. Let's split into pairs and take 3 different routes. Why except the Dragon of the East Wind? Paimon was a bit confused. Because the Wind Dragon aka Storm Terror is the Dragon of the East Wind, and it has been burning its own life force from the beginning. Lisa glanced at her, clasping her hands together. A trace of concern appeared between Jean's slightly covered eyebrows. The situation is urgent, let's put these matters aside for now. Next, Ember, you'll go with the traveler to the Temple of the West Wind, Lisa and Nolan will go to the Temple of the South Wind, Kaya, you'll head to the Temple of the North Wind. Wait a minute, wasn't it supposed to be 2 people per group? Why is Kaya going alone in the end? Don't tell me you're not going, acting Grandmaster. Paimon's little brain was starting to get confused. Kaya, once you get there, you'll likely have someone joining you. As for me, I must personally oversee Monstadt during this crisis. Acting Grandmaster Jean said after some thought. After all, with Monstadt not being calm, there might be ill-intentioned individuals taking advantage of the situation to challenge the knights. Oh, I see. If it's that guy, then it makes sense for me to go with him. We shouldn't delay any longer, I'll head over first. Kaya said thoughtfully, then quickly took action. Traveler, we can't fall behind either. We must complete the mission before the range of the storm expands. Amber urged, pulling the traveler along as they hurriedly set off. Hey, wait a minute, who is this guy that Kaya mentioned? Why does everyone speak in riddles, making my head spin? Paimon hurriedly flew to catch up, mumbling in a daze. Nolan rubbed his chin, guessing that the person Kaya mentioned was none other than Master Diluc, the Dark Knight hero he had once encountered by chance. After all, he was also protecting Mondstadt in his own way, it's just that he had a bit of a disagreement with the Knights of Favonius. Faced with the crisis of the Wind Dragon, he would certainly take action to find a solution. With his abilities, it wouldn't be difficult to monitor the movements of the Knights of Favonius, who had no intention of concealing their actions. In the game plot, he also appeared at the Temple of the North Wind, Wolf of the North, and discovered that the mastermind behind the scenes was the Abyss Order. What's on your mind, little adventurer? It's time for us to move. Lisa lightly stepped closer, her legs wrapped in black stockings, with droplet-shaped gemstones hanging from her purple anklets, rolling from side to side on her foot covered with black silk as she walked. She came in front of Nolan and flicked his forehead with a fingertip that glowed with the slightest bit of electricity, smiling softly. Consider this a punishment. I guessed what Kaya didn't finish saying. Did you accidentally damage a book you borrowed from the library? Didn't you? Nolan felt a bit embarrassed and shifted his gaze away from her fair face. Damn Kaya, I'll remember this. End of chapter. Chapter 118, Temple Ruins, 2 in 1 chapter. Well, it seems that's settled. Lisa once again curled her index finger, flicking Nolan's forehead lightly, this time without using the tingling lightning element. She pursed her lips, smiling, considering you helped fend off the wind dragon, I'll forgive you this time. Haha, I'm sorry, Miss Lisa. Nolan touched his forehead, pulling out a swordsmanship manual from his tattered backpack. The deep blue, pointed witch's hat slightly drooped as Lisa took the Rhine one-handed sword technique and sighed as she stroked the scuff marks on the top. Really, next time don't go exploring in the wilderness with books. Okay, Lisa, stop dilly-dallying. Dealing with the wind disaster is more urgent. Jean, the acting Grandmaster, frowned and urged. She was quite helpless with her good friend. All right, Grandmaster Jean, we're going now. Lisa decided to leave the book in the acting Grandmaster's office, planning to return later with Nolan to find a way to repair it. Suddenly, Nolan remembered that the knights probably weren't aware that the Abyss Order was behind the Wind Dragon incident. Having overheard the Abyss mages in a cave yesterday, he realized he could share this information sooner rather than waiting for Kaya to return from the Temple of the Wolf in the north. This would allow the knights to prepare earlier. After carefully considering his words, Nolan shared the intelligence he gathered from the Abyss mage's conversation with Grandmaster Jean and Lisa. The Abyss Order. Jean, holding her forehead as if pained, sat back down at her desk. We had our suspicions, but thank you for the heads up and for taking care of 3 enemies ahead of time. Jeans had developed good feelings towards you, obtained 120 affection points, current affection level LV.3, 150/300. It should have been obvious. If not for them, why would so many hilly churls establish camps near Monstadt? There was no obvious surprise on Lisa's face either, then she looked at Jean with some concern. After this is dealt with, you really should take a good rest. Even the formidable Grandmaster Jean has her limits. Listening to Lisa's words, Nolan somewhat remembered. Jean, the acting Grandmaster, seemed to have fallen ill not long after the Wind Dragon incident, primarily due to overwork and not allowing her body to rest, leading to weakness or something. He had the intention to remind her, but it wasn't as if he could directly tell her he knew she would fall ill in the future and to please take care of herself. Normal concerns like those from Lisa and Amber had been expressed countless times to no avail, let alone from Nolan. Forget it, it wasn't a big problem anyway. Falling ill might be a good thing, allowing her to realize that the work completed in a frenzy before falling sick would just pile up again during her illness. It would be better to rest regularly, avoiding the torment of illness. Nolan and Lisa did not linger too long in the Knights' headquarters and began making their way to the temple ruins of the Lion of the South Wind. Once again venturing into the wilderness. At this moment, Nolan started to realize that having been in Teyvat for quite some time, he was beginning to influence certain events slightly. For instance, in the game's storyline, Lumen defeating the Wind Dragon was due to the hidden and Mo Archon Venti's blessing, allowing her to fight in the air. In reality, it was his attack that lured the Wind Dragon down. This allowed Lumen to attack it without taking flight, thus Venti did not make an appearance, probably seeing that they could handle the Storm Terror without his help. Nolan pondered thoughtfully. From the ordinary person who had to worry about food and shelter at the beginning of the transmigration, he had now grown into a not-so-ordinary person. Although it was still far from being a truly powerful person, it was enough to make him feel quite accomplished. The temple ruins of the Lion of the Southwind was located on the slopes of Windrise Mountain. Leaving the city gates, crossing Mondstadt's Grand Bridge, following the main road right for a stretch, then turning left and running for the better part of a day would bring one to its doorstep. It was about as far away as the location where the previous gathering team had been robbed by the hilly churls. Although using the wind gliders, it was slightly easier to catch the road. But since it was already dusk when they set out, when they arrived at the temple they could already see the night sky full of stars. Thanks to the twinkling stars, the nights on the continent of Teyvat didn't seem all that dark. The grass-covered ground and the trees on the surrounding hills were bathed in a silvery glow. "Miss Lisa, is this the place?" Looking at the temple door in front of him, which had not been visited for a long time and was covered with cobwebs, Nolan thought about it and said with some doubt. In the game, it was the entrance to a secret realm, or you could say a domain, while in reality, it was the remains of an abandoned temple that had once been intact, but was now somewhat dilapidated. Perhaps that made more sense. After all, Mondstadt's citizens, wishing to visit a temple, surely didn't have to teleport into a secret realm first. Lisa, her legs sheathed in black lace-rimmed thigh-high stockings, took a step forward, the purple vision on her instep twinkling. As she parted her soft lips, she said, That's right, little adventurer. Let's go in. This place hasn't been tended to in a long time. Who knows, it may have become a den of monsters by now. That would be just perfect for gaining Adventure EXP. With Lisa there was no need to worry about encountering any monsters they couldn't defeat. Thinking like this, Nolan nodded, ran to Lisa's front and pushed open the stone door of the abandoned temple, and a puff of smoke floated out. The two held their breath, waving away the dust in front of them, and stepped back a bit. After a while, they proceeded inside. Behind the door lay a spacious path paved with blue stone slabs, flanked by thick railings, beside which naturally were the grass-covered hills on the slopes of Windrise Mountain. The crisp sound of Lisa's black high heels clacking against the stone path echoed through the air. Ahead was a brick staircase leading upwards. Upon climbing it, they arrived at a platform with a fire pit at each corner, all unlit, with only a path on the left side. Looking through, one could see an upward gust of wind. In a world composed of 7 elements, such natural phenomena were not unusual, and in the land of Teyvat, there were mechanisms capable of generating wind fields. Whether it was one or the other, its existence was certainly in accordance with natural laws. It was just that, with his limited knowledge, Nolan could not yet understand the principle behind wind currents blowing upward from the ground. Approaching the wind field, Nolan scanned the surroundings. There was nothing unusual at the moment, but surprisingly, he found 2 square wooden boxes blocking a regular treasure chest on the right side. It seems we're in luck. There is still a treasure chest left after being abandoned for so long. Lisa moistened her slightly dry lips with the pink tip of her tongue, a consequence of the wind. Maybe it hasn't been there for long, Nolan suggested as he pushed aside the square wooden box that was in the way and took out the normal treasure chest. Upon opening it, they found about 10,000 mora, 2 one-star artifacts, and 2 pieces of fine enhancement ore. Is this the seal of the wind, Unmo sigil? Lisa crouched down, tucking the hem of her skirt between her knees wrapped in over-the-knee black lace-trimmed stockings. The soft press of her calf against her thigh, even through the stockings, did little to conceal the soft, full sensation of flesh. She picked up a green seal from the bottom of the treasure chest, adorned with the marking of the wind element. Seal of wind? Miss Lisa, is this useful? Nolan asked curiously. In the game, the seal of wind or other elemental seals were things that randomly appeared in the area ruled by the corresponding archon, and could be used in the souvenir shop as tokens. The exact use was not stated for the time being. It's said that finding one means your adventures have been acknowledged by the 1,000 wines of Monstadt, Lisa, her fair face breaking into a smile, explained. I've heard that Marjorie, the owner of With Wind Comes Glory, has been collecting these. She stood up, legs together, handing the wind seal to Nolan. Keep it, little adventurer. Collect enough, and you can exchange them for something nice at her place. Thanks. Nolan nodded. Let's go, I've felt the magic connection left here by the wind dragon, cutting it off should complete our mission. Following Lisa to the front of the wind field, Nolan equipped his wind glider and took a light leap. The air currents then enveloped them both, starting their ascent. During this process, a minor mishap occurred. Since the airflow of the wind field was rising vertically, Lisa's robe hem and front were lifted, revealing her black lace-trimmed shorts and a glimpse of her soft, snowy abdomen. Her pointed witch hat nearly blew away as well. Nolan, quick to react, grabbed its wide brim in time. Soon after, the two exited the wind field at an entrance above, retracting their wind gliders to stand on the stone floor. That rising wind field really put me in a bit of an awkward spot. Lisa, her cheeks tinting with a shade of red, complained while smoothing her disheveled chestnut hair with her hands. Miss Lisa, why don't you use that spatial transfer magic? Nolan returned the hat to her and asked with some confusion. Lisa put on her deep blue pointed hat, nodding her head in thanks as she explained, it's all because of that storm dragon causing havoc in Monstadt. It's affected even this place. The flow of elemental energy and the circulation of ley lines around here are all tangled up, just like a yarn ball clawed by a cat. Messy. It not only interferes with the use of precise magic but also affects my mood and skin. Lisa has developed good feelings towards you, obtained 120 affection points, current affection level LV.4, 20/400. Seeing the affection points gained for helping Lisa with her hat, Nolan nodded in understanding, feeling that his knowledge was expanding just by being around Lisa. Continuing forward, they found a thunder elemental monument in the room's center. Lisa's fingertips sparked with electricity, launching a bolt that struck and illuminated it. A purple glow rose from the monument. A circle of 8 fire slimes suddenly appeared in the surroundings to encircle Nolan and Lisa. Among them there were also 2 large ones, so it was no surprise that they should have triggered the mechanism here. Oh my, such a lot of monsters. You must protect me well, little adventurer. Lisa said with a smile, seemingly unconcerned about the monsters. Nolan's dark eyes gradually took on a golden hue, resembling the color of Fiskal's long hair. He scanned the slimes, noting their levels weren't high. The two strongest large fire slimes were only level 10, while the smaller ones were around 5 or 6. He glanced at Lisa inadvertently and noticed she was marked with a question mark, just like the storm dragon. This suggested her strength was beyond the observable level of his golden eyes of judgment. Adventure EXP plus 406. Without needing Lisa to make a move, Nolan pinpointed the weaknesses of the slimes, large and small, defeating them with a single stroke of his sword, totaling a mere 400 plus experience points. Alright, let's move on, Miss Lisa. As Nolan stylishly sheathed his dull blade, turning around, he nearly bumped into the snowy cheeks beneath the hat. Lisa positioned her hands lightly behind her, leaning forward suddenly to bring her face close to his, her gaze locked onto his eyes. The warm breath from her fair nose brushed clearly against his face. The scene seemed to pause for a moment, lingering in stillness. She then moved her face away, hugging her chest, and spoke with a tone tinged with surprise. Legend has it that every person on the continent of Teyvat has their own seat of destiny, or you can call it their Archon seat, whose consists of 6 destiny stars. Lighting up each star grants one related powers and blessings. And it's not easy to light them up. Oh, and generally speaking you can only light up one destiny star every time you make a breakthrough. I then sensed a similar aura of the destiny star in your eyes. Could it be that this is the ability you gained after lighting it up? But you don't have a vision. Did you achieve this breakthrough with supreme martial skills? It's quite intriguing. Basically, these so-called destiny or fate stars are related to their constellations. Just like in the game, constellations are upgrades to character, and every character has a total of 6 constellation levels. This destiny stars work similarly, or it's maybe the same. Nolan knew that there was such a thing as a destiny star, but he didn't expect the reality that it was lit up because of a breakthrough, even though he was already level 26 over the strength of his first breakthrough. However, he hadn't actually collected materials for any breakthrough, and it was difficult to explain about gaining affection levels. He could only touch his head with a look of I don't know and say, "This ability just came out of nowhere when I was in danger during an adventure yesterday. I don't really understand how it happened myself." "Oh? You don't know? That's possible. After all, aside from scholars who have delved into this subject, ordinary people are unaware of these hidden secrets." Lisa's black-gloved fingers rested against her chin as she thought about it and smiled. "Has Miss Lisa lit up the destiny star as well? How many have been lit up?" Nolan asked with some curiosity. Want to know? Well, let me think. Exactly 5. Lighting up 5 destiny stars means making 5 breakthroughs, about 70 levels up. No wonder he couldn't see it. Nolan was quite astonished. He knew from the game's storyline that Lisa was powerful, but he hadn't expected her to actually reach this level. And what about the storm terror Dvalin, who could only be subdued with the help of the Inmo Archon? It was unimaginable. The two of them continued their journey in the Lion of the South Wind Temple while breaking through the various monsters while heading towards the magic connection point that the Wind Dragon left behind to gain power. Soon after, they quickly arrived at the target spot and saw an amber stone that looked like it was entangled in a hurricane. "Alright, just destroy it and we can go back to rest." Lisa, holding her snowy arms beneath her chest, slightly lifting the gentle curve, her green eyes shimmering with a hint of joy, as she said. End of chapter. Chapter 119, A Night Illuminated by Fiery Radiance. Windrise Mountainside, inside the Temple of the Lion of the South Wind. All the way to the location where the Wind Dragon had left behind the magical connection used to borrow the remnants of the temple's power. In the process, Nolan cleared a lot of monsters such as slimes and hilly churls on his own. In total, he gained more than 2,200 Adventure EXP, and a bunch of materials that could be sold for a significant amount of Mora. Naturally, Lisa, with her style, was pleased with their leisurely completion of the task. Just as Nolan carrying his dull blade wanted to break that green amber-like magical connection, suddenly a fire and a water abyss mage blocked his path. Waving their staffs, they launched a water bullet and a flame wave without giving Nolan any chance to react. "Kakik, stupid humans. The reason I did not strike as you made your way here was precisely to catch you off guard now," boasted the fluffy red fire abyss mage. Nolan's pupils reflected the intertwined colors of red and blue as his body quickly leaned back and flipped to the side to dodge, but the fire abyss mage predicted his dodging position and summoned a surge of flames from the ground. "I've noticed you guys long ago," Lisa said, her emerald eyes gleaming with amusement as she looked at Nolan, who was about to get hit. She lightly raised her hand, clad in a black glove, and a pale purple, translucent orb began to form in the center of her palm. It expanded instantly, enveloping both her and Nolan, easily scattering the abyss mage's elemental attacks with fizzling electric sparks upon contact. A static electric field. Through her deep research into elemental forces, Lisa had developed this technique related to the electro element, boasting both offensive and defensive capabilities. "What?" The fire mage was obviously a bit incredulous. "How is this human female so powerful? Why haven't I seen you act at all along the way?" The fire abyss mage said, clearly in disbelief. Seeing that they weren't attacked, Nolan breathed a sigh of relief. These abyss mages, despite their intelligence, always thought too logically, completely missing any semblance of emotion. It seemed somewhat amusing. But, of course, they weren't human. One couldn't expect too much from monsters. What was supposed to be a clever ambush now turned into a blunder. In Nolan's golden eyes, one was level 48, and the other was level 42. If he had encountered them alone, escape would have been his only option. But against Lisa's power, well above level 70, they stood no chance. Lisa extended her right hand, releasing countless bolts of lightning to the ground that spread into a circle, trapping the abyss mages within. Lightning rose. Her voice, calm yet commanding, echoed as thunder struck down. Even though the abyssal mages had elemental shields, they were not able to withstand it at all and were instantly pierced by the lightning that descended from the sky. And with a thud sound, their entire bodies fell to the ground with a scorched black color. There was no possibility of survival. Nolan felt a bit regretful looking at the situation. 2 abyss mages of over 40 levels together would have yielded more than 4,000 Adventure EXP. Alas, now it was just missed. All done, the abyss mages are taken care of. The last bit of work is still up to you, little adventurer. Lisa covered her mouth with her right hand, yawning, her fair face showing a trace of laziness. Nolan nodded and took 2 steps forward to shatter the green amber entangled by the hurricane with his dull blade. This should do it. He came in front of the fallen staffs of the 2 abyss mages and continued to use his dull blade to dismantle the 2 dead ley line leaves drop materials. These materials were of no use to him for the time being other than to sell them. Oh, it seems Kaya and Amber have also completed their tasks. The chaotic elements and ley lines are beginning to naturally heal. Lisa said, her arms crossed under her chest and her emerald eyes slightly closed, feeling the surrounding elemental forces and speculating. It looks like everything went smoothly, Miss Lisa. Let's hurry back then. Nolan wasn't surprised to hear this. After all, the game's storyline had resolved as smoothly, and his joining hadn't affected it to that extent. It's already so late, running back to Monstadt now would mean arriving by morning, wouldn't it? That seems overly exhausting. Lisa stood with her legs slightly together, her black lace-trimmed stockings accentuating her stance. Miss Lisa, are you suggesting I carry you back? Nolan joked. Oh, that does sound like a splendid idea. Unfortunately, it's already late at night. Rather than rushing back so tiredly, wouldn't it be better to rest for the night? When the elemental forces and ley lines have fully settled by morning, I could use magic to teleport us back. We'd arrive in the morning either way. Lisa's laughter shimmered like the purple gem on her stocking-clad foot, deepening in the night. She seemed genuinely intrigued by Nolan's suggestion, then spoke with a hint of regret. Can you really do that over such a distance? Nolan's face showed surprise. Don't underestimate me. A gentle breeze toyed with the front of her robe, caressing the soft insides of her legs. Lisa pressed her thinly reddened lips together and spoke. That makes some sense, actually. It allows for rest to maintain a better state of mind. If it wouldn't delay their matters, he, of course, didn't want to travel through the night. Right? After all, sleeping too late isn't good for the skin either. Lisa placed her palm against her fair cheek, smiling as she spoke. Nolan fell into a somewhat awkward silence. He had reason to believe that this last statement was her real concern. The two found a slightly elevated room within the larger temple ruins, which had only one entrance. Lisa asked Nolan to bring several small campfire stands and lit them with matches, a staple for outdoor adventuring illuminating the surrounding space. She took out the purple tent that was stored in her vision and set it up, then turned to Nolan. "Ah, my little adventurer, you'll take the first watch for the night. Though I've placed elemental markers around us that will alert us if any monsters come close, we can't be too careless." "Of course, there's no problem, Miss Lisa, take a good rest first." Nolan nodded. In a place like the wilderness where monsters might come out, it was indeed better to take turns resting if there were two people. "Then, I'm counting on you. Good night." The flames from the campfire painted Lisa's face a soft red. She lifted the tent flap, gave him a fleeting glance, and shared a gentle smile. "Lisa has developed good feelings towards you, obtained 150 affection points. Current affection level LV.4, 170/400. Chapter 120, Pyro Elemental Delusion, Lisa's improved version." Nolan leaned against the outside of the tent, devouring a piece of densely compressed thick bread. Come to think of it, he hadn't eaten much today. His stomach had been growling for a while, but thankfully, Lisa had brought some food. These were the compressed thick bread made by the Knight's Order she was part of. The bread tasted surprisingly good, filling, and was very satisfying to chew. Nolan looked at the character panel and saw his Adventure EXP displayed prominently. Adventure EXP, 2650. These Adventure EXP points are just enough to level up to level 27. After a brief consideration, he didn't hesitate to use them, and with a thought, the Adventure EXP quickly decreased, and threw it to the character level. Adventure EXP -2650. It felt like being embraced by a girl, the warmth of her body and her breath speeding up his heartbeat, while the flowing blood brought warmth and energy to every cell. Nolan pushed the generally accepted physiological limits of humans a bit further. He had theorized before that without breakthroughs, the species limit for an ordinary human was level 20. This limit referred to the bodily functions and physical strength that could be achieved without any external enhancements, the peak state a normal human could reach solely through training. After all, the principles of biology were universally applicable, even in the land of Teyvat. Like with humans on Earth, where running speeds can reach under 10 seconds for 100 meters, any further training improvements become nearly imperceptible. In Teyvat, it seemed that due to the pervasive presence of elemental powers, the limits of every species were raised a bit. And Nolan had managed to push this limit forward by 7 levels without any breakthroughs. With this going on, he might well stand shoulder to shoulder with Archons purely on the merit of his human physical prowess. While Nolan was thinking wildly, the evening breeze slightly opened the flap of the purple tent. Bathed in the light of the campfire, he could see Lisa sleeping on her side inside. A thin blanket covered her from shoulders to hips, with her legs, clad in over-knee black lace socks, crossed and slightly bent out of the blanket. Her fair cheeks, eyes closed, and her soft lips parted slightly, breathing out warm air. Beside her lay her neatly stacked robe and hat, with a pair of anklets hanging down, adorned with deep purple gems, placed atop the pointed toes of her black high heels with golden butterfly patterns. Don't look at Lisa sleeping like she's defenseless. If she encounters any danger, the cause of peril might instantly be annihilated by a lightning spell set up somewhere unknown. Nolan couldn't help but think so as he ate the last bite of thick bread. Time passed little by little, and the first half of the night passed quickly. But Lisa didn't have the slightest tendency to wake up. It was obvious that she had overslept, and Nolan couldn't do anything to wake up the sleeping lady. He could only continue to lean on the outside of the tent and rest his eyes slightly. Monstadt, Windrise hillside slopes. Early in the morning, the warm sunlight shone on Nolan's face through the tent's raised curtains. He furrowed his brows, feeling a shadow loom over him, an itch on his cheek prompting him to open his eyes with difficulty. "Hi, good morning, little adventurer." Lisa squatted down, her black stockings slightly wrinkled at the knees. Her wide, pointed witch hat blocked the sunlight from Nolan's face. Leaning forward slightly, she brushed her chestnut hair against his cheek and smiled. Miss Lisa, how come I?" Nolan sat up, looking around at the purple drapes inside the tent and the thin blanket on him, puzzled. "Perhaps you felt too secure by your sister's side. Last night, you fell asleep outside the tent without any guard up." "Humph, that won't do." A smile appeared on Lisa's fair face as she spoke. "Ha, so that's what happened." Nolan shifted his gaze outside, realizing he might have been dragged into the tent by her, which was somewhat embarrassing. "However, we agreed to take turns watching through the night. You didn't wake me up, little adventurer." "I've received your feelings for your sister. As a reward, I'll give this to you ahead of time." Wearing her pointed witch hat, Lisa raised her fair arm, and with a flicker of light, a somewhat dim object resembling a red glass bead, adorned with a fire element symbol, appeared in her palm. Lisa has developed good feelings towards you, obtained 120 affection points, current affection level LV.4, 290/400. As she presented the item, her affection for Nolan also increased slightly. Is this the debt collector's delusion? Nolan was slightly surprised in his heart. It hadn't been that long, had it? Had it already been improved? That's right. How could such mass-produced delusions ever pose a challenge to me? I've slightly modified the way it channels elemental power, and now it's barely usable. Lisa's pink tongue slightly extended to wet her soft lips as she spoke. Does that mean it no longer has side effects? Nolan took the delusion and stepped outside, allowing the sunlight to reflect off the delusion, creating tiny specks of light. Well, although that's the case, in order to eliminate its side effects, we had to compromise on its performance. Lisa packed up the tent, her face showing a hint of regret as she spoke. This was a standard delusion, the materials used in its creation were not too precious, making it difficult to break through its inherent limitations despite improvements. A compromise? So, the delusion has been weakened then. Nolan also had a limited understanding of the delusion, and didn't feel anything special when he heard Lisa's words. Previously it did say that it could be an external magical device that could freely channel elemental forces, although the process required the user's life force to be consumed. And now, it acts more like a storage device for elemental power. It can automatically absorb external elemental power from its surroundings without needing the user's life force. However, the amount of elemental power it can store is limited, and once depleted, it requires a long wait to recharge. Lisa approached, her ankles adorned with purple anklets, outlined distinctly by her black stockings, and she spoke in her high heels. I see, that sounds quite good, actually. Nolan was in love with the delusion and didn't mind for being weakened. Lisa's fair arms crossed over her abdomen, slightly lifting her bosom wrapped in white fabric, giving off a sense of soft volume. She pursed her lips into a smile and said, as long as the little adventurer likes it, that's good. Here, let me teach you how to release the elemental power within. It's quite simple. Under Lisa's guidance, Nolan quickly learned how to use the pyro-elemental delusion, Lisa's improved version. Wearing it like a vision, he could control its activation with his willpower, now barely managing to imbue his weapon with fire elemental power. If he wanted to use more complicated moves, according to Lisa, he would need to have a deeper understanding of the elemental forces. However, since he fundamentally couldn't channel elemental power and was merely using a device that could, still being an ordinary person, he couldn't sense elemental power, making it difficult to gain any deep understanding. So Nolan's ability to imbue fire elements and release simple fireballs was about the extent of his capability. Complex elemental magic, like Lisa's static electric field or elemental markings or something, was out of his reach. This limitation was indeed a bit disappointing, but there was a surprising benefit. Originally, the delusion lacked the vision's ability to store items, but after Lisa's magical modification into a device for storing elemental power, it gained the capacity to hold items as well. Although it had a fixed carrying capacity of 10 kilograms, it greatly facilitated Nolan's adventures. It must be said, Lisa is truly remarkable. End of chapter. Sparkle sparkle sparkle. Got 30 members on Patreon, thank you so much guys. Shout out time. MC. Jangster. Eric Belenger. Gam Gam. Bragg. Parker Kodeler. Leo Flather. Mail Breton. Brunhild 41. Killer Chico 11. Wesley Tebbins. Dylan A. Neil DePaul. Charles Xavier 666. Dakota Sheeler. Crichton Their Advantage. Elect. Shyamal Shyamal. Snykesern. Kyle Al. Clinton Fraley. Shadow Reader. Jason Lopez. My name is Klondike. Insomniologist. Alexander Semino. Zach Edgar. Sonic Boom. Ethan Farias.
Thanks for listening.